The King's Avatar audiobook by Kevin Chapter 1481. Focal Point Translator. Namyami Editor. Namyami Suma Cheng Bao Rongsing. Tyranny had studied Happy for 3 days, and now it was time for them to conclude their findings. They outlined a summary of these two players' performances in their match against Blue Rain. This obviously wasn't all the information that they had obtained. Under Zhang Xinji's meticulous guidance, they analyzed every piece of information. What should we do? Everyone had the same thought, much like how Zhang Jiao had tacitly understood earlier the role that he would need to play. However, because of Zhang Xinji's caution and seriousness, even Han Wenqing, who had known Zhang Xinji for many years, had to confirm that everyone was on the same page. Everything was conducted anxiously but orderly. Tyranny, Samsara, Tiny Herb, and Happy, who had entered the quarterfinals despite this being their first year in the league. The next step was the finals. The next step was the championship cup itself. At this moment, who could relax? Who could give up? Every year when it reached this point in time, the atmosphere would turn abnormally heavy. Even the wars between in-game players would turn exceptionally heated. The teams that made it to the semi-finals were all teams with a strong fan base. When expectations were high, people would often become sensitive and weak. Since 4 teams had qualified for the quarterfinals, that meant 4 teams had been eliminated. None of the 4 eliminated teams were weak teams. How could any of the fans be content with these results? 1 day, 2 days, day after day of tension passed. The first round of the semi-finals was about to begin. The first round would be Happy's home game against Tyranny. It would take place in Happy's Stadium in City H. Happy's home stadium was formerly Excellent Era's. In the Glory Alliance, there were no 2 teams with more enmity towards each other than Excellent Era and Tyranny. When Excellent Era was relegated from the league, countless people thought that the alliance had now lost a piece of history. Afterwards, Excellent Era disbanded and went away. It seemed like this piece of history would never return. But then, Happy joined the alliance. Their leader was Excellent Era's former captain, Ye Xiu. Happy also succeeded Excellent Era's home stadium in City H for a moment. Tyranny's fans took their hostility towards Excellent Era and placed it all onto Ye Xiu alone. Of course, Ye Xiu played an important part in the relationship between the 2 teams. It was just that Happy was Happy. Say that Happy was the continuation of Excellent Era. How could that be said? In the Challenger League, Happy was the one who eliminated Excellent Era and led to their disbandment. Fortunately, Excellent Era was rescued in the end, leaving a few key remnants of the organization. The new Excellent Era had won the Challenger League this season and would be returning to the alliance. Beside them was also a group of loyal fans who would never abandon the team. But there were many people who felt like Happy was more like the original Excellent Era, even if they were the team that led to Excellent Era's disbandment. It was because Happy took over the original Excellent Era's home stadium. It was because Happy's captain was Excellent Era's former captain, Ye Xiu. The Ye Xiu that had founded Excellent Era's dynasty. The Ye Xiu that had earned the title of Battle God for one autumn leaf. No matter what, these were all of the past, things that had already become reality. These achievements would never be separated from Ye Xiu, nor would they ever be forgotten. As a result, when Happy and Tyranny met in the playoffs, many people brought up the often talked about subject of old enemies. Excellent Era. It wouldn't be good to talk more about one person's name. Ye Xiu. Everyone kept on talking about Ye Xiu. Even Suma Cheng, who used to be a core player on Excellent Era, was mentioned less. After all, when Excellent Era won their 3 championships, Suma Cheng hadn't been a part of the team yet, and most of the enmity between Excellent Era and Tyranny had been established during that period of time. Suma Cheng happened to join the season that Tyranny beat Excellent Era. As such, the hostility towards Suma Cheng from Tyranny's fans was naturally far less than Ye Xiu, who had led the team that had eliminated Tyranny 3 times in a row. The match between Happy and Tyranny was discussed heavily by the media, who hyped up the match by flipping through talking point after talking point. The day of the match was about to arrive, and the sight of the fans that had assembled at the stadium was astonishing to see. Although Happy was a popular team nowadays, their home game against Blue Rain was nowhere near as crazy. As the beginning of the match approached, the number of people gathered at the stadium was so large that not only were there no empty seats, it might even be hard to find space outside the venue. This sort of scene could only be found before when Excellent Era played against Tyranny. Had City H's Glory fans regarded Happy as an alternative to Excellent Era, it was a reasonable possibility, but it shouldn't be to this extent. After all, Happy defeating Excellent Era in the Challenger League was a fact that no loyal Excellent Era fan could ever forget. There were Excellent Era fans that hated Happy. There were Excellent Era fans that were indifferent about Happy, but those who liked Happy could only be ones who liked fads. Then, where did all of these Glory fans gathered here come from? The playoffs was a popular topic among the media. There were, of course, special reports about the various histories behind the teams. Just taking a look at a few articles would give a good overview of the situation. It was true that many of the people gathered here didn't have any love or Happy, but their hostility towards Tyranny was as strong as ever. That was why they came. Not to cheer on Happy, but to see Tyranny fall. There was no Excellent Era these days, but many Excellent Era fans continued their tradition of hating on Tyranny. Many of the reporters that were here to conduct interviews sighed at this scene. Although Excellent Era had already been gone from the alliance for 2 years, their influence remained. The players could be gone, the characters could be changed, the stadium could be replaced, but the history that they had left behind would always remain. Excellent Era was a memory, one whose glory would never be forgotten, and their enmity with Tyranny was a part of that memory. As a result, there was now another point of discussion. Happy was the one that led to Excellent Era's downfall, yet now they were going to carry on the tradition. It was a very contradictory situation. Of course, there were no lack of optimists in the interviews. They cheerfully expressed that they were here today to see the drama. It didn't matter who won. Either way, they would be able to vent their anger. All sorts of topics were pushed to the peak of attention because of this match. There were even fans who were certain that they had seen Huang Xiaoshan in the crowd. Others claimed to see Yu Wenzhou, Yang Kong, Tang Hao. In short, the pro players who were no longer in contention for the championships all seemed to be somewhere in the crowd. Who would win? Who would lose? Everyone had come here to see the answer to this question. That night at 8 o'clock, at the sold-out Xiaoshan Stadium, many of the Glory fans gathered outside without seats did not leave. They didn't need to appreciate the course of the match. Just being able to know the results firsthand was enough for the wait to be worth it. Inside the venue's prep rooms, the two teams were getting ready for the match. "It's really lively today, huh?" Fang Rui was relaxed, talking to everyone as if this were normal. Team Happy had done what they had always done. At around 7, they left the internet cafe, ready to cross the street to Xiaoshan Stadium. But when they saw the giant crowd outside, they got scared. It'd be a miracle if famous players like them could make it inside without any trouble. In the end, Chen Guo urgently contacted the stadium employees. Xiaoshan Stadium had hosted Glory events for many years. They had experienced the rivalry between Excellent Era and Tyranny and were familiar with handling it. As soon as they took Chen Guo's phone call, they immediately told them that a special passageway had been prepared for them. The stadium even sent out a staff member to guide Happy inside. In fact, they already knew that Team Happy was right across street from them. When they got inside the venue, the sea of people outside the stadium left a deep impression on them. Ye Xiu and Sima Cheng weren't too surprised. They had been a part of Excellent Era and had experienced it before. but even Fang Rui, an all-star, had never seen such an army before. As a matter of fact, despite having more experience than the rookies, he felt more surprised than them. Why aren't these people leaving? The match is almost about to start, Chen Guo said. She was too naive. Chen Guo thought that those glory fans outside were hoping for a ticket, and since the match was about to start, they clearly hadn't gotten any tickets and should be leaving. How could she have known that their passion was no longer something that could be stopped by a ticket to the match? Just waiting outside, awaiting for the results with everyone else, was a type of joy to these people. I just know that the crowd gathered here today probably isn't here to support us. Don't feel too pressured by them, Ye Xiu said solemnly. Chen Guo stared blankly. His intentions were good, but how come the logic didn't seem to make sense? Tyranny has this many fans here, Tang Ru asked. No matter how much of a rookie she was, she knew quite a bit about the scene now. Their opponent was Team Tyranny. And having worked at Happy Internet Cafe in City H, Tang Ru knew about the people of this city's relationship with Team Tyranny long before she became serious about playing Glory. They're probably here hoping for Tyranny to fall, Ye Xiu said. Then aren't they hoping for us to win? Tang Ru said. They'll probably be happy if we lose too, Ye Xiu said. Tang Ru was smart. She quickly understood. Too bad we won't, she said. That's why I'm saying we should just treat them as if they didn't exist, Ye Xiu said. Just as he said this, they heard a knock on their door. The staff were calling the two teams to get ready to go on stage. Ye Xiu led the way out of the room and came across Team Tyranny's captain and his old rival, Han Wenqing, who was also leading his team out. They looked at each other face to face without any expression. Soon, the two teams lined up next to each other in the passageway. When are you going to retire? Ye Xiu suddenly asked Han Wenqing an especially depressing question. It's still early. Han Wenqing's gaze was firm. You still want to win a championship, Ye Xiu smirked. You've got no chance this year. Humph, Han Wenqing snorted. Ye Xiu turned his head and gave an upward nod at the third Tyranny player in line. You've got no chance at a fifth second-place finish either. Zhang Jiao wished he could give Ye Xiu 10 middle fingers. Chapter 1482, Stepping Back. Chapter 1482, Stepping Back. Translator. Namyami Editor. Namyami, they hadn't even gone on stage yet, and the mockery had already begun. This knife at Zhang Jiao was particularly cruel. Even the stadium worker nearby couldn't keep a straight face. But these people from Tyranny had interacted with Ye Xiu for far too many years and understood him very well. And Zhang Jiao was such an easy target, it'd be strange if Ye Xiu didn't take a few jabs at him. So even though Zhang Jiao expressed his indignation, Tyranny as a whole remained fairly unruffled. They were all so familiar with each other that even if the hostility was high, they just treated it all as insults traded between bad friends. Notably, when Ye Xiu said this, some people in Tyranny almost laughed, such as Lin Jingyan. When Lin Jingyan saw Zhang Jiao twist his head to look at him, he hastily turned it into a cough. Adjusting his glasses, he regained his composure. When did you become nearsighted? Fang Rui happened to be standing across from Lin Jingyan. Fang Rui wasn't as familiar with the others in Tyranny, but he and Lin Jingyan had been partners back in the day, so of course the degree of familiarity wasn't the same. Lin Jingyan adjusted his glasses again. They're plain glass, trying to look all intellectual. Fang Ryu said, I think they looked quite good. Lin Jingyan appeared to be quite satisfied with this new accessory, but then he heard another voice speak up from behind Fang Rui. You're a brawler. What kind of brawler wears glasses to look intellectual? Steamed Bun. Only Steamed Bun would have such strict views on brawlers. My character's class is a brawler, thanks. Lin Jingyan felt gloomy as he turned and answered Steamed Bun. You don't like brawlers, then why'd you pick one? Said Steamed Bun. At this point, Lin Jingyan couldn't explain any further. This steamed bun insisted on drawing an equals sign between the in-game brawler class and a real-life brawler. Alright, the brawler class did have the aura of a street thug, but this was still a separate matter, okay? Did using this class mean that you had to have the aura of a street thug? Lin Jingyan looked at steamed bun through his plain glass glasses and found that he couldn't say anything. This guy really fit the image. This hairstyle, this attitude, this attire, throw him onto a street and anyone would recognize him as a little brawler. And quite a handsome brawler at that. Ha. Aside from a weak chuckle, Lin Jingyan really had no idea what to say. In the end, Happy's trash talk did have some effect, not from the experienced Ye Xiu, but from the rookie steamed bun. Fortunately, they were finally about to walk onto the stage. Ye Xiu, Han Wenqing. When the two captains met at the center of the stage and shook hands, the entire stadium erupted with enthusiastic applause. 10 years. Both of them had once stood at the peak of glory, had experienced ups and downs. Now, 10 years had passed and they still stood on this stage, still stood on this battlefield, still faced off against each other. Whether they loved or hated them, no one could erase the respect held toward these two people. The two of them shook hands and prepared for battle once more after so many times throughout the years. Everyone delivered up applause, no matter whether they were Happy fans, Tyranny fans, or old Excellent Era fans looking for excitement. But soon after the applause, "Kill him!" Such brutal and foul language immediately rose up within Xiaoshan Stadium. Respect had been expressed, so the next step was to establish dominance. The two of them had faced off for 10 years, and the fans behind them had faced off for 10 years as well. Even if their team backgrounds were thrown away, these two people's names were enough to ignite a fiery chaos. The emotions of the stadium were immediately bursting aflame, and under this ruckus, the players of the two teams continued to shake hands down the line. After that, the players returned to their respective player areas, and Ye Xiu alone remained on stage. Oh. In Happy's home stadium, there were naturally many Happy fans. Seeing this, they immediately started cheering. They knew all too well what this meant. This meant that Ye Xiu was still the first up. Starting from the second round of the regular season up through the second round of layoffs right now, he had always been Happy's first player, and he had yet to lose a single 1v1. 37. Loyal fans didn't even recognize this streak anymore. It should be 39. There was no individual competition in the playoffs. There was only the group arena, and they couldn't expect anyone to 1v5, right? So, because Ye Xiu had twice defeated the opponent's first player, they counted that result into the record. Quite a few people were emphasizing that Ye Xiu's current win streak was no longer 37, but more accurately 39. And now, for the 40th time, Ye Xiu was Happy's first player. There was no more suspense. After the pre-match formalities, he simply remained on stage and aimlessly strolled around. In the past, this would have been quite a valuable shot because Ye Xiu never made public appearances before. He'd always hide very well. But now it had already been a whole season, so that mysterious aura had long since disappeared. By wandering around on stage now, in everyone's eyes, it looked like he was trying to provoke tyranny. "I'm right here. Which of you will come to fight me?" "Who's coming?" Happy's fans knew how to get hype and immediately began shouting. "Han Wenqing, you dare come!" Someone shouted this. In theory, if a Happy fan wasn't formerly an Excellent Era fan, they shouldn't have much reason to hate Han Wenqing. But everyone at least knew that there was so much history between Han Wenqing and Ye Xiu, and so at this time, they wouldn't shy away from helping their own team's captain provoke the other. Of course, everyone loved this kind of topic, and so very quickly, the entire stadium was helping Ye Xiu call out Han Wenqing. Tyranny's fans had no way of retaliating, because the player order was decided before the match. If they really hadn't set Han Wenqing as the first player, There was no way that they would decide to change the order just because the whole stadium was shouting for Han Wenking to come on stage. But Happy's choice to send Ye Xiu first was a very obvious thing, right? Would Tyranny back down from such a challenge? They wouldn't. Of course they wouldn't. This was Tyranny, this was their captain Han Wenking. Knowing that Ye Xiu stood before him, would he retreat? What a joke. When they thought to hear, Tyranny's fans immediately gained confidence. Thus, they also began to shout for their captain, as though it was a guarantee that Han Wenking would come on stage. All the way until the digital screen flashed with Tyranny's first player. All the way until in Tyranny's player area the first player stood up. The stadium quieted down for a moment, and then Happy's fans exploded with crazy jeering. And Tyranny's fans, they were silent. Tyranny's first player, Chin Mayun. Character, sharpshooter -9 degrees. Han Wenking actually retreated. He'd clearly known that Happy's first player would be Ye Xiu, and yet he still didn't stand forward to fight Ye Xiu, instead leaving this opportunity to Chin Mayun, this most overlooked player of Tyranny's main roster. The audience was shocked, as were the commentators Pan Lin and Li Yibo. This was entirely outside of their expectations. Pan Lin and Li Yibo had just been talking about how Ye Xiu's position as Happy's first player had never changed, and so in the confrontations in this round of the playoffs, it was very possible that Ye Xiu would 1v1 Han Wenking a number of times. Best of 3. This 10-year conflict might finally see an answer, Pan Lin had noted, but unexpectedly, Han Wenking actually hadn't come up to fight. At first the two wondered whether Han Wenking had sustained some injury and wouldn't be able to fight at all today. But when they thought again, they remembered he had still been playing well last round. Would he suffer such a serious injury in just a few days? Tyranny couldn't be that unlucky. The two exchanged glances. They had no idea how they would explain this. The televised broadcast ignored Chin Mayun as he went on stage, instead choosing to show a close-up of Han Wenking. Tyranny's captain merely sat in his seat, his face cold, his attention on their player walking on stage. It didn't seem like there was anything unusual going on. The match hadn't even begun yet, but the player order had already given everyone a big surprise. It was just completely outside of everyone's expectations that had been formed over the course of 10 years. Ye Xiu, too, was surprised. The broadcast didn't skip over him and furiously snatched close-ups of his reaction when Tyranny didn't send up Han Wenking. Ye Xiu was indeed somewhat caught off guard, somewhat surprised. He glanced toward Han Wenking, still in Tyranny's player area. But then he smiled lightly. Was it mockery? Those who saw this immediately began analyzing Ye Xiu's smile. Not mockery. This smile looked more like one of understanding, more like one of relief. When Han Wenking's expression was shown next to his on-screen, this feeling became even stronger. After shaking hands with Chin Mayun, Ye Xiu headed to the player booth to prepare for the upcoming battle. Everyone was still discussing what it meant that Han Wenking hadn't come on stage, and poor Chin Mayun was completely overlooked. Han Wenking isn't going up against Ye Xiu first battle. Are you watching this? Huang Xiaoshan had come to watch the match live. With his status, getting the best VIP seats wasn't difficult, of course. There was no way he could sit with the masses because, after all, he was a top star of glory as well. Right now, seeing Tyranny's arrangement, Huang Xiaoshan sent out a text. "I'm watching." A reply came, "Yu Wenzhou. What do you think he's trying to do?" Huang Xiaoshan continued to ask. "Stepping back," Yu Wenzhou replied. They were all players at the highest level. With such great mutual understanding, not much needed to be said. Stepping back. The one thing that it had always looked like Han Wenking didn't know how to do was step back. But now he made this kind of choice. Was he yielding? Was he compromising? No. There was absolutely no way. If Han Wenking knew how to yield, how to compromise, then countless people's worldviews would be completely shattered. Han Wenqing was changing. In the twilight years of his professional career, for the sake of that goal, he was adjusting himself. Much of this could be seen, in fact, from his performance over the course of the regular season. Stepping back wasn't compromising, even less so yielding. Stepping back was a wisdom that Han Wenqing understood but was unwilling to accept. Yet this time he had done it, and this was just an arrangement of player order. On the actual battlefield, the Han Wenqing who now knew how to step back, what kind of performance would he bring? Chapter 1483, High-Level Hide-and-Seek. Chapter 1483, High-Level Hide-and-Seek. Translator, Namyami Editor, Namyami. Happy-faced tyranny in their home game. The first round of the group arena would be Ye Xiu versus Qin Mayan. The match was at the loading screen stage, but the crowd had yet to quiet down. The people didn't care about the match itself. Happy's fans were booing loudly at Han Wenqing for not coming out, while Tyranny's fans felt like they couldn't hold their heads high. They forgot that although Han Wenqing hadn't been sent up this round, the player who had, the poor Qin Mayan, wasn't getting any attention. Up until the match began. When Qin Mayan's -9 degrees appeared on stage through Glory's projection technology, on the big screen in the stadium, on the TV or computer screens of countless Tyranny fans, they finally realized that though Han Wenqing may not have gone up, their Tyranny was still fighting. You can do it. Cheers erupted from the away game seats, Team Tyranny's fans. The loud cheers all of a sudden gave Happy's fans a fright. Excellent Era fans were experts at competing against Tyranny fans. Although Happy's fanbase had some crossover with Excellent Era's fanbase, it wasn't a majority. Happy's fans couldn't beat Tyranny's fans in a yelling contest, and the regular season had already proved that. But this was the playoffs, a competition where one side died while the other side lived. Happy was a new team that was creating a miracle. Once this thought came across their minds, Happy's fans started to feel their blood boil too. This is our home field. How can we let Tyranny overwhelm us? The first intense battle of this playoffs round began with the audience. In the meantime, the two players on stage were calmly making their way forward. Happy had chosen the map, Thatcher Manor. It was another setting from a map in the heavenly domain. The map consisted of a multitude of elements, a lake on the west side, a small forest on the east side, and a 2-story tall manor in the center of the map. Apart from that, there were all sorts of small buildings scattered throughout the map, such as a mill, a stable, gardens, and so on. The two characters spawned on the north and south end of the map. Both of them chose a direct route straight to the center. However, because of the obstruction from the manor, neither of them could see the other side. Qin Mayan's -9 degrees came from the north side towards the back of the manor. It looked like he wasn't a complete stranger to this map. After arriving there, he had -9 degrees move towards a corner and then borrow window sills and pillars as platforms to jump on. Shortly afterwards, -9 degrees made his way to the roof of the manor, giving him a wide view of the map. But Qin Mayan immediately had -9 degrees crouch and search for an appropriate position before carefully looking outwards. He was looking towards the south, but there were no signs of anyone. Judging by Lord Grimm's movement speed, if he had taken the middle road, he should be here too. But he wasn't. The left, the right, or could it be Qin Mayan looked downwards? The manor wasn't just decoration. It could be entered. If he and Ye Xiu chose to take the middle road, while he had been jumping onto the roof, he could have easily entered the manor without him noticing. There was a door at the back of the manor too, but Qin Mayan chose not to go in. Sharpshooters held an advantageous position in an open field. Fighting inside the manor would not be a good idea for a sharpshooter. Perhaps Ye Xiu had chosen to go in for that very reason. As Qin Mayan pondered over this question, his -9 degrees took the next step. Boom! He vaguely heard an explosion, seemingly far yet seemingly close at the same time. As the explosions continued to sound, he was able to accurately determine that the explosions were coming from below. Hua, -9 degrees, was laying on the rooftop. However, he hadn't expected Lord Grimm to fire shots from the inside and blow a hole in the roof to force -9 degrees to fall towards him. Qin Mayan reacted quite fast. He immediately had his character jump to the side and throw a grenade into the hole. Ye Xiu's Lord Grimm was standing there with his umbrella open, looking at the roof and admiring his masterpiece. Then he noticed a grenade roll out from a cloud of black smoke. Bang, boom. Ye Xiu fired at the grenade, making it explode. For a normal player, executing this move would make them feel unbelievably cool, but in Ye Xiu's hands, it just looked like any other day. The grenade was no threat to him, but it gave Ye Xiu second thoughts. He could have Lord Grimm fly through the hole in the roof and give chase using rotor wings, but he had to consider the possibility of an ambush from Qin Mayan. As a result, Lord Grimm went towards the window. He jumped up, shattered the glass, and leaped out. It was the second floor, but Lord Grimm didn't fall. The moment he was outside, his umbrella transformed into a ninjato and stabbed into the wall. He used it as a lever to jump and then stabbed his ninjato into the wall again. Ye Xiu was very familiar with the ninja's rock climbing technique. It was difficult for the audience to keep their eyes away from Lord Grimm's fluid movements. Lord Grimm climbed up the wall, his direction clear. After a few rises and falls, he made it onto the roof. He didn't stop to rest. He rolled towards a bunker to hide, not making a sound the entire way through. Then he peeked out his head and looked towards the other end. Nothing. -9 degrees wasn't there. Qin Mayan hadn't chosen to mount an ambush. Ye Xiu didn't waste time just because it was outside of his expectations. Lord Grimm quickly looked around and found a few potential spots on the rooftop. From Lord Grimm blowing a hole in the roof to jumping onto the roof, the entire course of action took only 5 seconds. 5 seconds. Ye Xiu had checked where Qin Mayan could have moved to within those 5 seconds. There were only 2 other possibilities. First, he could have jumped off the roof. But Ye Xiu's Lord Grimm had just climbed up the wall and didn't see him, so it was unlikely. The second possibility was that Qin Mayan jumped through that hole, calm, collected, and exceptional at picking spots. These were the characteristics that Ye Xiu observed from the 5th player who stood beside Tyranny's 4 heavenly kings, exceptional at picking spots. Ye Xiu suddenly realized something. Lord Grimm immediately rolled to the side. Bang! The sound of a gunshot. A bullet pierced through the roof and shot towards the sky. Whoa! Gasps came from the crowd as the bullet flew. The viewers had an omniscient view and could see everything. Lord Grimm had jumped out the window and made his way to the roof, while -9 degrees did the opposite and fell through the hole in the roof. Then, just like how Ye Xiu had accurately determined -9 degrees position, Qin Mayan accurately determined Lord Grimm's position. How had they done it? Intuition and deduction. Li Yibo had commented on this point when Ye Xiu had found -9 degrees position. After Lord Grimm entered the manor, he immediately moved towards a spot. From that spot, he was able to catch a glimpse of -9 degrees jumping towards the roof. This wasn't a coincidence. Ye Xiu knew that it was possible to jump onto the roof from the back of the manor, so he looked for a spot for which he could see that. Then once Qin Mayan got to the roof, what hidden observation spots were there? Ye Xiu knew of a spot, and it was the spot that Qin Mayan had found. As a result, he attacked there. Vice versa, Qin Mayan had predicted what Ye Xiu would do, so he had -9 degrees fall through the roof into the manor. If Ye Xiu wanted to catch a -9 degrees that was laying in wait for an ambush, where would he go? As a result, he attacked there. A high-level confrontation and high-level deduction. If neither side was exceptional at picking spots and didn't choose the most optimal position, the two would have predicted incorrectly. Li Yibo had given them praise for this point. And this time, Qin Mayan's sneak attack didn't need his explanation. Everyone understood it now. But everyone was astonished that Qin Mayan's sneak attack actually missed. He had used a high-level snipe, but it missed its mark. Lord Grimm suddenly rolling as if he had a premonition was just too miraculous. How did he know? Pan Lin couldn't help but ask Li Yibo. Ye Xiu probably made a prediction one step ahead. Li Yibo forced out his words. He wasn't sure if he was completely correct this time. There was some level of prediction for Ye Xiu's dodge, but to just barely dodge it in such a timely manner, reaction speed had been a part of it, but luck had been very important too. 2 guns, 2 switches in position, fluid movements, and deep mind games. The level of skill displayed in this match could clearly be seen. It looks like this match will be a brilliant game of hide-and-seek. Just when Li Yibo made this statement, he heard a crash. The rooftop broke apart, collapsing mountain. After Lord Grimm dodged that shot, he didn't stop to take a break. He immediately jumped up and used collapsing mountain towards the roof. Happy had certainly figured out just how durable the roof was. This collapsing mountain split open the roof as Lord Grimm crashed down, one in the air, one on the ground. Lord Grimm and -9 degrees saw each other. Hide and seek. Li Yibo hadn't even finished his words when the 2 characters found each other. He had spoken too soon and didn't have time to swallow back his words. Bang, 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 bang. Qin Mayan stayed calm. His -9 degrees fired at Lord Grimm as he moved. Hua. The myriad manifestations umbrella opened, blocking the bullets. Collapsing mountain had ended when the roof broke apart. Right now, Lord Grimm was falling freely. If he were hit by bullets, he would certainly be delivery gunned away. But with protection from a shield, everything changed. Sword light flashed, falling light blade. Lord Grimm changed directions in the air. His umbrella retracted, but -9 degrees. He was gone. Chapter 1484, Faster at Finding Spots. Chapter 1484. Faster at Finding Spots. Translator. Namyami. Editor. Namyami, what is he going to do? Those who understood the change felt more nervous than Ye Xiu. Pan Lin and Li Yibo were even more so. The 2 wished this wasn't a live stream. They wanted to press pause and then give a detailed analysis of the change for the audience to hear, but unfortunately they couldn't. It was a match where a myriad of changes could happen in an instant. Hua. Without any trace of -9 degrees to be found, for a moment, Ye Xiu had Lord Grimm raise his myriad manifestations umbrella. Hide-and-seek. Maybe it looked like that, but it was a hide-and-seek deathmatch. The goal of the game wasn't to find the opponent, but to kill the opponent. After losing sight of -9 degrees, Ye Xiu's response was to lift his umbrella to be on guard against any sudden ambushes from -9 degrees. Then, Ye Xiu quickly recalled where -9 degrees had been when his Lord Grimm had fallen to the ground with collapsing mountain. Next, he tried to predict where -9 degrees could be. For -9 degrees to vanish, he obviously had to have moved, which meant that he first had to pick a spot. Team Happy had chosen this map. How could Ye Xiu not be familiar with this map? He didn't need to look around. He could deduce the optimal position in his head. Charge! Lord Grimm held the umbrella shield above his head as he dashed towards a direction. But at this moment, a pitch-black gun reached out from the other side and aimed towards Lord Grimm. Everyone thought that Lord Grimm would be hit from behind by the bullet, but then he suddenly stopped. Lord Grimm canceled charge and turned around. Light flashed. Bang! Sparks flew out from that pitch-black gun. Qin Mayan had put in the inputs. It was too late for him to stop. However, between pressing the trigger and Lord Grimm turning around, one of them came first. Ye Xiu had somehow known that -9 degrees would be here before the gunshot rang. Had he looked over here before? The broadcast director checked a replay, but he found nothing. Lord Grimm had never looked towards -9 degrees position. How had he known? Everyone looked at one another. Li Yibo didn't know, but Pan Lin had thrown the question to him already. He didn't answer for now. Lord Grimm stopped abruptly, turned around, and then flickered towards -9 degrees with a shining cut. It was true that sharpshooters had the strongest close combat capabilities among gunner classes, but given a choice, very few sharpshooters would choose to fight at a close range. Gun fu wasn't an easy technique to perform. Without this technique, just their few taijutsu skills alone were nothing worthy of praise. So when Qin Mayan saw Lord Grim heading towards him, his first thought was to retreat. Bang, 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 bang. Gunshots continued to ring. -9 degrees leaped backwards and open-fired. Bullets sprayed out from his dual guns, the recoil helping to push -9 degrees back. In this enclosed area, even if the bullets missed Lord Grim, they would hit other objects in the room. The wall, tables, and all sorts of ornaments were shattered by the bullets. Lord Grim was unscathed, though. Lord Grim drew a beautiful arc across where he moved, traversing through the rain of bullets. Although -9 degrees aerial gun technique allowed him to move fast, it couldn't compare to an actual movement skill. The distance between the two characters was slowly erased step by step. 7 steps, 6 steps, 5 steps, 4 steps. The bullets suddenly formed a net that flew towards Lord Grim. -9 degrees had also stopped retreating. His movements seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary, but he would constantly maintain an angle that he could attack from. The distance between the two was subtly kept under control. 4-step gun fu, those who knew what instantly recognized it. It could be considered a part of the gun fu technique. The number of steps was a way to look at a player's mastery over the technique. Joe Zekai's 3-step gun fu was something no other player in Glory had achieved. It was a realm that only he had reached. The other pro sharpshooters hovered around 4 steps. If they were feeling good, they could reach 3.5 steps. If they weren't, 4 or even 4.5 steps could be riddled with mistakes. Gun fu wasn't a survival technique for when opponents got close. It was an offensive technique for sharpshooters. Qin Mayan's main role in Team Tyranny wasn't as an attacker. His main responsibilities were to restrict his opponents. Gun fu could occasionally be seen from him, but it never drew too much attention. But right now, 4-step gun fu, The viewers didn't even have time to appreciate it when -9 degrees suddenly stepped forward. Bang, bang, bang. He continued to exert pressure onto Lord Grim, but the distance between them was 3 steps. 3-step gun fu. Everyone was astonished. Qin Mayan, whose existence in the team seemed so weak, was actually able to perform what up until now only Joe Zekai could do. But before the viewers could appreciate this peak 3-step gun fu, -9 degrees jumped back, pulling the distance from 3 steps to 5 steps. Some players might not see anything strange, but the skilled players, especially the sharpshooters, were very surprised. Gun fu was about moving in and out, but that didn't mean going from 3 steps to 5 steps to 3 steps. Moving in and out was a way to describe a position, which the user could move in to attack or move out to retreat. The number of steps was defined as how many steps it took to move both in and out. Qin Mayan had just performed a 3-step gun fu, but in the blink of an eye, it turned into 5-step gun fu. There was nothing inherently wrong with this sort of change, but how long had Ye Xiu and Qin Mayan been fighting for? 4 steps to 3 steps to 5 steps. Wasn't he changing it too much? Was his gun fu not stable? There were too many questions, and the two most worried people among the audience were Pan Lin and Li Yibo, who needed to explain it to their friends watching. Li Yibo seemed to have a vague idea, but he wasn't confident in it. Taking advantage of the intensity of the match, he decided not to talk about it. Instead, he and Pan Lin listed out what skills the two players were using. After 5 steps was 7 steps. 7 steps was somewhat far. Gun fu combined gunfire with the sharpshooter's several kicking skills. At a distance of 7 steps, the majority of a sharpshooter's close combat threat was out of the picture. At this point, he was probably planning on breaking away from using gun fu and running away, right? The audience focused their eyes on Lord Grimm. The other side was getting ready to run. What will he do? Lord Grimm made movements, but it was simply to attack. He didn't give chase. Ye Xiu let -9 degrees reach 7 steps away. Qin Mayan felt a shiver down his spine. Was he seen through? 7 steps was bait to lure Lord Grimm forward. However, Ye Xiu didn't move. Lord Grimm aimed his attacks towards a very specific direction. It was to counter what Qin Mayan would have done if the bait had succeeded. He really did see through me. Such a specific direction of attack let Qin Mayan make a firm decision. Bang, 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 gunfire continued to sound. Lord Grimm didn't give chase, so Qin Mayan followed along and had -9 degrees begin to retreat. He had already figured out what route he wanted to take. Even though he wasn't very familiar with this map, he was exceptional at picking spots, which also meant that he was exceptional at adapting to all sorts of maps. But then, Lord Grimm decided to move. As soon as Qin Mayan gave away his intent, Ye Xiu acted. Slide kick. Lord Grimm slid across the ground, the bullets flying past him, as he headed towards -9 degrees. Qin Mayan immediately had -9 degrees adjust by lowering his aim. He predicted where Lord Grimm would slide to and attacked. Bang, 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 bang. The glossy marble ground became riddled with holes. Lord Grimm had suddenly jumped. While he had been sliding across the ground, he sprung up into the air just as -9 degrees adjusted his aim. Lord Grimm had a gun too. The tip of his myriad manifestations umbrella opened and aimed at -9 degrees. Bang, bang. Bullets shot out. However, the myriad manifestations gun form was a rifle, and Lord Grimm didn't have the class advancement skill, gun proficiency. Lord Grimm could not fire rapidly like sharpshooters using normal attacks. Lord Grimm only shot out 2 bullets, seemingly negligible out of all the other bullets flying through the air. But Qin Mayan didn't neglect them. Lord Grimm jumped, the muzzle of his gun gleaming in the light. Qin Mayan immediately had -9 degrees roll, while also adjusting his aim, pointing his gun towards the sky. A bright fiery radiance flashed where Lord Grimm was. Flying meteor. The exorcist's skill was an above level 20 skill, which meant that Ye Xiu had chosen to put this skill onto his myriad manifestations umbrella. This skill had probably been used before Lord Grimm had fired those 2 shots. Those 2 shots were bait to lure Qin Mayan into dodging. Before -9 degrees could press the trigger, the flying meteor had already descended. Boom! A sea of fire swallowed the area. This time, Qin Mayan didn't have time to dodge. The flying meteor had been timed too precisely, but the attack only landed because of Qin Mayan's skill in picking the optimal spot and moving there. Huang Xiaoshan received a message from Yu Wenzhou. Yes, these top experts understood this reasoning. Positioning was originally Qin Mayan's strongest point. However, Ye Xiu took advantage of that strength. It was true that Qin Mayan could quickly find the most optimal position and move there precisely, but because he always made the optimal choice, it meant that he lacked mix-ups. If Ye Xiu could figure out what that optimal choice was, he could accurately predict where Qin Mayan would move to. That sounded simple, but it wasn't something anyone could do. Positioning was Qin Mayan's speciality, which meant that he was better and faster than others at figuring out what the optimal position was at any given moment. But since Ye Xiu could keep up with his pace, it meant that Ye Xiu was no worse than Qin Mayan in terms of positioning. It could even be said that he could find the right spots faster than Qin Mayan could. Chapter 1485, Saving Trouble. Chapter 1485, Saving Trouble. Translator, Namyami. Editor, Namyami. The flying meteor was about to strike -9 degrees. For a moment, whirling flames covered Qin Mayan's view. He could only rely on his experience and intuition to make his next move, but his every action was within Ye Xiu's predictions. A figure suddenly appeared inside the sea of fire as if he were born from the fire, Lord Grim, a distance of 3 steps. Qin Mayan had chosen to retreat. The distance between -9 degrees and Lord Grim was 3 steps. Qin Mayan had shown a 3-step gun fu previously, and it appeared to be a distance that he could maintain. However, Qin Mayan knew why it seemed like that. His 3-step gun fu wasn't perfect. He didn't have complete control over moving in and out within 3 steps, but because of his outstanding positioning, he occasionally found spots where he could perform gun fu within 3 steps. When those moments came, he would choose to step forward and perform a 3-step gun fu like he had done previously in his exchange with Lord Grim. After all, the closer the steps, the higher the threat. When he was no longer able to maintain it, he would move back. By relying on his positioning skills, Qin Mayan was able to form his own unique form of gun fu, which allowed him to keep the threat of gun fu up while staying at a comfortable distance. However, right now, Qin Mayan wasn't in a position where he could perform gun fu at this distance of 3 steps. There may have been an opportunity at one point, but the spot that Lord Grim was in destroyed Qin Mayan's last hopes. I've been seen through. Qin Mayan knew that his technique and his intent had been seen through. Every step he took was uncomfortable for him. The first strike had hit his vital point. As expected of the one who's fought with Captain for 10 years and often had the upper hand. Qin Mayan felt awe. When he had started his journey, Ye Xiu had already retired. However, his existence was a part of excellent era's history and tyranny's history, the villain in tyranny's story. Qin Mayan had heard of the stories and had seen Ye Xiu's accomplishments. He had fought against him in the team competitions during the regular season. But in this 1v1, he finally experienced for himself just how terrifying tyranny's villain was. Do I still have a chance? Once Lord Grim closed the distance between them, he tried to fight while retreating. He looked for ways to escape. The window, the door, the corner over there. There wasn't much space in the room. Every exit seemed so close, but close did not mean reachable. Lord Grim blocked him from moving towards those exits. Finally, -9 degrees was forced into a corner. Without enough space, he couldn't even execute gun fu. At this point, sharpshooters practically had no options left. Qin Mayan realized that he had made a mistake in the beginning. Choosing to fight in this enclosed space had been a grave mistake. But if he hadn't entered the room, if he had waited up on the roof to ambush Lord Grim, he would have been caught by Lord Grim's sneak attack. Qin Mayan had already started to review this match, and when he came to this point, he could only stare blankly at his screen. Throughout this match, Ye Xiu had the initiative every step of the way. It was because Ye Xiu knew that his positioning was outstanding, so he could always make an accurate prediction of where he would move to. When Lord Grim went through the window onto the roof to sneak up on -9 degrees, he missed. Why? Wasn't it because Qin Mayan had dropped through the hole in the roof into the room? Ye Xiu hadn't covered this option because, from a certain perspective, he knew that it wasn't a smart one. However, Qin Mayan really did choose this unwise option, throwing Ye Xiu's plans into disarray for a bit. Qin Mayan felt like he had realized something. When facing against an opponent like Ye Xiu, the optimal option was not always the best option because the opponent knew what that optimal option was. I lost. Qin Mayan's -9 degrees fell. However, he had taken out 43% of Lord Grim's health too, so it wasn't too bad. After careful observation and thought, Li Yibo finally noticed the key points in this match and began speaking confidently about the competition of positioning between the two players. In the end, the older, the wiser. Ye Xiu is more skilled, Li Yibo sighed. But what about here? Pan Lin hinted at the broadcast director to show a replay. When Lord Grim broke the rooftop and fell down, he blocked a few shots with his myriad manifestations umbrella. But when he retracted his umbrella, he couldn't see his opponent. However, he quickly deduced Qin Mayan's position and found him soon afterwards. Qin Mayan wasn't in the optimal position, so how did Ye Xiu figure out where he was and then fake an attack? Pan Lin asked. Ha ha ha, Li Yibo laughed with delight. It's true that Qin Mayan didn't pick the optimal position, but picking the right spot is dependent on the circumstances. At that time, not only did Qin Mayan need to pick a spot, he needed to take advantage of Ye Xiu's blind spots and move while Ye Xiu couldn't see him. I see, Pan Lin understood. Under these conditions, Qin Mayan's position is, in fact, optimal, Li Yibo said, but if Ye Xiu had figured out Qin Mayan's position, why didn't he drop down and directly attack him? Why bother faking an attack? Because Qin Mayan really had picked a very good spot. Look, if Lord Grimm landed on the ground first, he wouldn't have been in a good position to launch an attack. In fact, -9 degrees would have had more space. By faking an attack, he was able to move to a better position to attack, Li Yibo explained. Oh, Pan Lin felt enlightened and felt even more appreciation for Li Yibo. He had been won over by his analysis. In other words, the purpose of Ye Xiu's feint was to paralyze the opponent and to move to a better position, Pan Lin concluded. That's right, Li Yibo nodded. He felt proud that he had seen through the issue. What an amazing fight, Pan Lin sighed. Qin Mayan was beaten by Ye Xiu at his own game. I hope it won't affect him later. That was what Li Yibo said, but it was evidently a way of phrasing what he wanted to say in a nicer way. In reality, he was pointing out that Ye Xiu beating Qin Mayan would be a blow to tyranny's morale. But despite Ye Xiu having the upper hand, Qin Mayan was still able to take down 43% of Lord Grimm's health. Qin Mayan performed quite well, Pan Lin said. Yes, especially in the latter half of the fight where he was backed into a corner. Sharpshooters have a very difficult time fighting in those conditions, Li Yibo said. Let's see who tyranny will send up next, Pan Lin said. By this time, Qin Mayan had left the player booth. The camera had zoomed in onto him for some time. Li Yibo had seen his expressionless face and had said the words, I hope it won't affect him later, as a response. The two commentators found a few praiseworthy moments for him before discussing the next matchup. But in the eyes of the experts, the discussion of the match wasn't finished yet. 43% seems a bit much, Huang Xiaoshan messaged Yu Wenzhou. Ye Xiu had the clear upper hand. Using nearly half his health to take down the opponent was a bit excessive. His opponent didn't make it easy. Qin Mayan's positioning is truly outstanding, Yu Wenzhou replied. When the two experts chatted with each other, they didn't need to explain every detail like the commentators. They just needed to touch upon the main point. If he gave himself more space and put more pressure on him, he could have reduced the damage he took, Huang Xiaoshan replied. But it's more risky, and it would have increased the amount of inputs he would have needed to make, Yu Wenzhou said. So he's trying to save his energy, Huang Xiaoshan said. That's why we tried to wear him down, Yu Wenzhou said. That bastard, Huang Xiaoshan cursed. They had drawn up a strategy, targeting what Ye Xiu had been worried about, but Ye Xiu was able to neutralize it. When Huang Xiaoshan thought back, he felt even more helpless. On the other hand, Ye Xiu's simple and crude setups for Blue Rain all hit their target. For example, take Blue Rain's Mr. Clutch, Song Zio. His playoffs run was truly depressing. He had gained fame from his plays in the playoffs. It was as if the playoffs was his home. But his performance in Blue Rain's 2 rounds against Happy. In the team competition, as the 6th player, he was often the Mr. Clutch that helped Blue Rain open up the field, yet before he could even do anything, the match had already been decided. Mr. Clutch wasn't on the field at the crucial moments. How could he be clutch if he wasn't there? Happy had crudely placed Song Zio on the back burner. Let's see who tyranny will send up next. It wasn't clear if it was because Yu Wenzhou had also recalled their loss against Happy, but he now switched topics. The big screen displayed tyranny's next player. Zhang Jiao, Spitfire, dazzling 100 blossoms. The crowd booed. Zhang Jiao had returned to the scene, abandoning Hundred Blossoms and joining Tyranny. Hundred Blossoms viewed him as a traitor. The fans of other teams, including Tyranny, looked down on his conduct. The current Zhang Jiao was nowhere near as popular as before. There were always people who would criticize his moral character, and Happy's home stadium was no exception. As soon as Zhang Jiao appeared, boos and curses were immediately thrown his way. Zhang Jiao was used to it. It had been 2 years. He could even face Hundred Blossoms calmly now. None of those boos or criticisms counted as anything. 2 years. Zhang Jiao was counting his days. He knew that, for people like him, every day that passed was one less day. If they failed this year, what about next year? Did they have a next year? But none of them could have expected that the one blocking their way would be Ye Xiu. As he walked onto the stage, Zhang Jiao couldn't help but recall those glorious years when the two had once battled. Chapter 1486. One Person's Dream. Chapter 1486. One Person's Dream. Translator. Namyami Editor. Namyami Ye Xiu, a first-generation pro player. Zhang Jiao, a second-generation pro player. There was only a year between them, so there was no need for any courtesies for seniority. Though Ye Xiu would sometimes act the wise, knowing elder, Zhang Jiao clearly had no care for it. The two's first real top-level face-off was in the 3rd season of the Glory Pro League. That season, Team Hundred Blossoms Sun Yiping and Zhang Jiao, their blood and blossoms had fully matured, sweeping across the alliance and taking first place in the regular season. However, in the end, in the finals, they were met with excellent era. The story of how one autumn leaf cut through their combo with his evil annihilation had become a legend in this scene. In the end, blood and blossoms fell into the background. Zhang Jiao wouldn't accept that, of course, so they returned anew in the 4th season. But this season, they didn't even make it into the finals. The season came to a close with the legendary battle where Tyranny ended Excellent Era's dynasty. Blood and Blossoms once more became no more than a passerby. In the 5th season, Hundred Blossoms came back in high spirits, ready for the new season after 3 seasons of experience. That was when their captain, Sun Yiping, was forced to retire mid-season in his golden years due to a hand injury. Zhang Jiao took over as captain and Team Hundred Blossoms charged forward amidst their tears, empowered by their sorrow, straight into the finals. However, the result was that they lost against the one who joined the scene in the 3rd season, known throughout the glory scene as the Magician. They lost to the one who, as rumor would have it, was the closest to the god of glory, the closest to erecting a dynasty like Ye Xiu did. They lost to Wang Jixi. Wang Jixi became Hundred Blossoms' worst nightmare. In the 7th season, when they were mere inches away from reaching the championships again, it was Wang Jixi who shattered their dreams once again. 7 years and 3 runners-up, it was almost as if Hundred Blossoms was plagued by some sort of curse. When they fell to Wang Jixi this time, blood and blossoms had been left in the past, and this had become an accomplishment of Zhang Jiao's efforts alone. Perhaps it was because he thought that it was already the best he could do alone. One summer later, Zhang Jiao suddenly announced his retirement. Today, the story of blood and blossoms had truly ended. Though Sun Yiping had already retired in the 5th season, Zhang Jiao had always fought for the both of them. No one could understand what sorrow he felt, what disappointment he lived in. The people would only sigh. If Sun Yiping didn't retire from his injuries, if Sun Yiping had been there all along, then would Blood and Blossoms have erected a Hundred Blossoms dynasty after Excellent Era fell. There were no ifs. These ifs were nothing but knives to the heart for those involved. Zhang Jiao had never given up, otherwise he wouldn't have carried the responsibility and dream that two were meant to bear and gritted his teeth, charging onwards alone. Unfortunately, he still fell in the end and gave up. Blood and Blossoms was a story of two. One person wouldn't be able to write that perfect ending. However, for him personally, there was still a dream in his heart, an everlasting dream. After a season, he returned, abandoning his old home 100 Blossoms and joining Tyranny, a pandering move he was despised for. Zhang Jiao had doubted his choices, but ultimately he didn't regret it. He affirmed his goals. Now he stood here, still in control of dazzling 100 Blossoms, but it was Tyranny he was fighting for. As for his opponent, Ye Xiu wasn't unfamiliar, but his character was the unspecialized Lord Grimm, representing the new team Happy. Familiar scene, familiar characters, but different people. No, the people were the same people, but everything else was messed up. However, no matter what happened, his dream of the championship would never change. Bang! A sudden gunshot startled everyone. Zhang Jiao's dazzling 100 Blossoms had just loaded into the map and suddenly shot a bullet into the air. Click, 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 dazzling 100 Blossoms switched rapidly through his cartridges before heading off. This was a habit of Zhang Jiao's. It was still the same map, and both chose to go the middle path, so they arrived in the manor in the middle of the map one after the other. Lord Grimm went in directly through the front door, and dazzling 100 Blossoms straight through the back door. Although Spitfires were a gunner class, they had many different kinds of attacks and were called the mages of gunners. Their battle styles didn't need a lot of space like sharpshooters and launchers. An enclosed speed was equally as convenient. In fact, there were some enclosed terrains that Spitfires excelled in. The manor had 2 floors. Ye Xiu and Qin Mayan's battle happened entirely on the 2nd floor. The map wouldn't refresh, so the 2nd floor was still in complete disarray from the previous battle. -9 bullets had turned the rooms that the 2 characters had fought intensely into a complete mess. However, Lord Grimm and dazzling 100 Blossoms were still on the 1st floor. Both characters were wary, each step taken with infinite caution. Ye Xiu was familiar with the map. Lord Grimm first watched the window for a while like he did against Qin Mayan. After not seeing any signs of dazzling 100 Blossoms, he was clearly acting on the thought that he probably came in through the back door. As for Zhang Jiao, he had clearly lost the initiative since he didn't know the map. After entering through the back door, he cautiously surveyed his surroundings, the room layout, the doorway. After entering the room, he glanced around several times and randomly went for the doorway that led to the hallway, opening it with a creak. The audience held their breath. In the corridor outside the doorway, Lord Grimm was carefully walking over. The sudden opening of the door would expose Zhang Jiao's position. Careless. He knows it's a corridor, Pan Lin was saying, but then suddenly shut up. Knowing that the corridor was here, he should be on guard for the possibility of his opponent to just so happen to be passing by. He was about to say that, but then he shut up because he saw that after dazzling 100 Blossoms opened the door, he didn't walk out. Creak. The door opened, then closed again, creaking all the while. Lord Grimm in the corridor outside already had his myriad manifestations umbrella raised. Lord Grimm pointed towards the doorway as he silently edged rightwards to give himself a better view of the room. Creak. The door continued to close with only a sliver of an opening left. Was he not coming out? Just as everyone thought this, dazzling 100 Blossoms darted out suddenly. The door was slammed open again. Dazzling 100 Blossoms had the door behind him as cover, his right hand holding his automatic handgun hunter-seeker out in front of him. Zhang Jiao saw Lord Grimm immediately. Ye Xiu also saw the charging dazzling 100 Blossoms immediately. Gunshots. Both guns spat embers simultaneously. However, for normal shots, the myriad manifestations umbrella was a rifle. Each reload allowed for 2 shots. Meanwhile, dazzling 100 Blossoms was using an automatic handgun. On top of that, he had the Spitfire class skill ammunition expansion, which affected normal attacks as well. The number of shots they could fire in that moment were on 2 completely different levels. So Lord Grimm immediately attacked with a skill. Anti-tank missiles. 3 missiles shot out in rapid succession. Boom, boom, boom. In the narrow corridor, the two characters aimed their guns at one another. The shots they fired collided, exploding. A thick smoke billowed out and enveloped the corridor, and the force of the explosion sent both characters backwards. Ye Xiu didn't retreat. With a push of his mouse, Lord Grim used slide kick, charging straight at the billowing smoke. "That's too daring," Pan Lin cried out in surprise. It was an unknown situation, but it wouldn't be hard to guard against Ye Xiu going on the offensive. So long as Zhang Jiao was on guard, he could just throw a few grenades into the smoke. How would Lord Grim dodge that? However, when he saw the exact direction Lord Grim had aimed his slide kick in, he realized something was wrong. Was he planning to slide kick the wall? In that moment of confusion, Lord Grim had already slid to the wall. Boom, boom, boom. As expected, flashes of explosions bloomed amidst the smoke. Zhang Jiao had been prepared for the possibility of an attack. However, in this moment Lord Grim slid to the wall and then suddenly jumped up. He unsheathed his ninjato from the myriad manifestations umbrella, swinging in and stabbing it into the wall. With a leap, he pulled the blade and swung again. He was running along the wall. Pan Lin stared in shock. The whole audience stared in shock. The corridor was narrow, so the force of the explosions enveloped the entire area. But with the wall to brace himself on, Lord Grim wouldn't be thrown back. The force would just press him closer against the wall. Taking some insignificant damage, Lord Grim had managed to charge out of the smoke with 2 jumps, falling forward. This was originally where Dazzling 100 Blossoms was, but when Lord Grim appeared, Dazzling 100 Blossoms immediately darted out of the way. He had kept some distance between him and the thick smoke. Zhang Jiao wouldn't be so stupid as to stand right in front of it. Thus, he could still dodge out of the way even when Lord Grim used such an unexpected method of attack. With a step, Dazzling 100 Blossoms stepped back into the room. Kriyuk, the door continued to close. With the way he was falling, Lord Grim was going to hit the door. If that happened, that would be rather embarrassing. Lord Grim hurriedly swung his ninjato again. Bang, 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 bang. After switching positions, Dazzling 100 Blossoms immediately began to attack, but Lord Grim dodged the bullets by swinging his ninjato towards the wall behind, ending up stepping on the top of the door accurately. With a kick, Lord Grim jumped to the other side of the door and the door closed rapidly. Dazzling 100 Blossoms had to retreat swiftly, almost getting hit in the face by the door. Clank. Slamming shut, the door separated the two characters, one inside the room, the other outside. Since the first level of the castle had to take a lot of weight, the walls were very thick. They weren't something characters could destroy without some effort. Right now, with the two separated like this, they didn't have to worry about a sneak attack coming through the wall. Lord Grim didn't make any moves for now. This was because Ye Xiu knew the map well. The room had a lot of ways out. If he circled around, he probably wouldn't be able to catch the other, unless Zhang Jiao stayed in the room and didn't move. Right now, the quickest way to continue his assault was to charge inside through this door. However, the door opened outwards, not inwards, which meant that Ye Xiu couldn't barge inside like Zhang Jiao had barged outside, using the door to cover his back while he faced the other way. If the door had opened inwards, Ye Xiu would be able to charge in, being able to react no slower than the person waiting on the other side. However, if Ye Xiu charged inside and Zhang Jiao was ready to ambush him, that would not be good. What should he do? The two characters pressed themselves against the wall, silent and unmoving. Chapter 1487, The True 100 Blossoms. Chapter 1487, The True 100 Blossoms. Translator, Namyami. Editor, Namyami. The two characters each stood against the wall. The distance between them was very small, the tension was thick in the air, until messages appeared in the chat. You come in. You come out. the childish exchange swiftly broke the tense atmosphere. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or not, but while this meaningless chat occurred, Ye Xiu was moving. Lord Grimm ended up not going through the door, but he didn't circle around to a different room either. He actually chose to nimbly make his way outside through the window. Then he swung his ninjato, quickly flipping up to the second-floor window and rolling back inside, having chosen a suitable position. Everyone was caught off guard. With this action, was he planning to directly break through the floor of the second level to ambush from above? It was a complicated task for the fully immersive projection to beautifully display this interior environment, because anything that obstructed the audience view had to be eliminated. Right now, the floor of the second level looked like it was suspended in midair. Ye Xiu's Lord Grimm and Zhang Giles' dazzling 100 blossoms were displayed like that, one above and one below, still at a very close distance, but the distance was now vertical instead of horizontal. On the first floor, Zhang Giles still hadn't detected anything. Dazzling 100 blossoms lifted a gun with one hand and held a grenade in the other. From where he was standing, he could attack every entrance of this room. But right now, Ye Xiu wasn't planning to use an entrance. Hualala. Ye Xiu very much valued time. He didn't hesitate at all while he was on the second floor. While many people were still processing his actions, he was already beginning to act. The cross-section of this castle was fragile enough. One more attack was enough to break through, and amidst the shattered pieces, Lord Grimm plummeted downward. In the blink of an eye, he had already found dazzling 100 blossoms' position. The myriad manifestations' umbrella swung over fire. Zhang Giles' reaction wasn't slow. As soon as he heard a noise above him, even as he lifted his camera to check, his automatic pistol, the silver weapon hunting seeker, was already lifted into the air, and the grenade in his left hand was tossed outward. Immediately after, he confirmed the situation above him and continued to toss grenade after grenade, like a weapon master in wuxia, or like a magician with his playing cards. Those grenades flew outward non-stop. Boom, 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 boom. The middle height of the room was instantly swallowed by explosions, just like the passageway earlier, splitting the space in two. Unexpected. Ye Xiu's plan was quite unexpected, but this method was a bit too blunt. The attack made a loud noise when it impacted the floor of the second level, and Zhang Giles was good enough to immediately react and deal with it. What Ye Xiu gained here was similar to the situation Zhang Giles had been in when he'd rushed outward through the door earlier. The situation wasn't particularly advantageous for either side. It would come down to whose reaction was faster. Earlier in the passageway, the two of them had tied after an exchange of blows. This time, with one above and one below, who would win the upper hand? Roundhouse kick. Dazzling 100 blossoms suddenly used a low-level sharpshooter skill, sweeping around 360 degrees. Miss. There was actually no one next to dazzling 100 blossoms, and Zhang Giles instantly knew that he had made a mistake in his prediction. He had originally thought that Ye Xiu would take advantage of the cover, using shadow clone technique to swiftly close in. Yet, surprisingly, Ye Xiu hadn't done this. One misstep instantly revealed an opening. Amidst the flashing explosions in midair, Lord Grimm looked like he was flying with an imperial sword, and he came plummeting down with a falling light blade. He had actually stayed in midair for that long. The audience could see clearly that after Lord Grimm broke through the floor, he didn't hurry to the ground. After the myriad manifestations' umbrella fired a few shots in gun form, it shifted back to a ninjato and was anchored into the ceiling. From the start, Ye Xiu didn't think that his sneak attack from above would directly cause Zhang Giles any difficulty. He just wanted to create an unusual situation. With this small opening that Zhang Giles exposed with his mistake, he now attacked. Zhang Giles had no time to dodge. The falling light blade came right down upon dazzling 100 blossoms. But then, with a blast, Lord Grim was also thrown aside by a shockwave. There was a hole in the ground, the scar left by the explosion of a landmine. Ye Xiu had seized an opportunity for attack, but he hadn't expected that Zhang Jiao also had an ambush ready. In their second clash, the two of them once again reached a stalemate. But this was only speaking about the battle situation. In terms of damage, Ye Xiu's Lord Grim had broken through the firing line in the first clash, and suffered bombing in the second before forcefully breaking through the firing line. In doing so, he had taken more than a little bit of damage. After being sent flying by this landmine, Lord Grim's health had fallen to 42%, having started this round at 57%. 2 times he had used up his health for the sake of his offensive, but he hadn't managed to win the initiative. From this exchange perspective, even though Ye Xiu had initiated the attack both times, Zhang Jiao had ultimately ended up better off. Defensive fighting. Blue Rain was a defensive team, so of course they were very sensitive to a defensive playstyle. Seeing this situation, Huang Xiaoshan immediately sent another text to Yu Wenzhou. Yes, Yu Wenzhou's reply acknowledged this point, and in the televised broadcast, Pan Lin and Li Yibo were still exclaiming about how the two players' incredible reaction speeds and responses made them evenly matched. Those two hadn't even realized the deeper significance of this. This is more like you. In another area of the stadium, an audience member who was keeping a low profile as he watched the match now uttered this exclamation. Sun Jiping, a former part of the Blood and Blossom duo, a former God-level player, now contributing the last remnants of his strength to Team Heavenly Swords with the limited time he had. Today, he could no longer be considered a star. The attention he'd garnered when first returning had gradually faded away because of his severely limited appearances in Heavenly Swords. Heavenly Swords, where he was now, had no business in the playoffs. For him, the championship dream was already long in the past. He simply remained here as a passerby, all because of that piece of his heart that prevented him from ever giving up on glory completely. Yes, a passerby. His kind of return and on-stage appearance could only be considered passing by. Because of this, Sun Jiping didn't have any regrets about not tagging along with the black horse that was Team Happy. Happy was the starting point for his return, and now this grassroots team with which he wasn't unfamiliar was actually piercing straight through toward the championship. If he were still in this team, Sun Jiping believed that he would go crazy from his inability to go all out at such a crucial time. Heavenly Swords was a wise choice. Sun Jiping never regretted it, and seeing Happy reach this point, Sun Jiping felt gratified as well. He looked forward to seeing this team create a miracle, just like when they had defeated Excellent Era in the Challenger League. But now, Happy was actually facing off against Tyranny. Toward Tyranny itself, Sun Jiping didn't have any particularly strong feelings. He would pay attention to them only because Zhang Jiao was there, because his former partner, his closest friend, was there. His emotions, his goal, his pursuit, Sun Jiping understood completely. But now, Zhang Jiao collided with Happy. It was really a difficult situation to watch. But Sun Jiping was a simple and direct person. He didn't have any conflicts in his heart. Facing each other on the narrow road, the courageous would emerge victorious. His belief was just that simple. For him, his emotions would never become a burden on the battlefield, and as a spectator in the audience, it was the same. But now, the Zhang Jiao he saw didn't have the furious, desperate stance of before. In particular, it was a far cry from that struggling ferocity that he displayed while leading 100 Blossoms after Sun Jiping had retired from injury. Was this a sign that he no longer had that fighting spirit of before? Of course that wasn't the case, because this right now was the playstyle that truly suited him the best. The Hundred Blossoms style was called the most splendid and romantic playstyle in all of glory. As the inventor of this style, Zhang Jiao certainly wasn't imitating anyone with his use of skills. His technique simply reflected his personality. This was just the kind of person he was. That sort of furious, desperate hacking and slashing very much went against his character. But in Hundred Blossoms, after Sun Yiping was forced to retire from his injury, Zhang Jiao could only take up Sun Yiping's desperate portion of the playstyle as well. In reality, it didn't have to be like this. Sun Yiping had always wanted to say this to Zhang Jiao, but it was entirely because of his own injury that this burden landed upon Zhang Jiao. When the other was so desperately carrying it, what right did Sun Yiping have to tell him not to do this? If you're willing to carry it, then stay strong and advance. This was just the kind of person that Sun Yiping was. He only knew how to staunchly encourage his old friend like this. Unfortunately, in the end, all that Zhang Jiao tasted were the bitter fruits of defeat. It wasn't until he arrived at tyranny that he could finally set down his burdens of the past. Zhang Jiao no longer had to carry the responsibility of two people by himself. And so, the Zhang Jiao of the earliest Blood and Blossoms era had returned. This was the condition that suited him best. Just in this match, Sun Yiping saw it clearly. The Hundred Blossoms playstyle was protection, was cover. It filled the openings left by teammates. It augmented the teammates' offensives. This was an extremely careful and thorough playstyle. It wasn't something that could be accomplished just by throwing around complicated controls. That kind of Hundred Blossoms wasn't a true Hundred Blossoms. In the time that Zhang Jiao had led Hundred Blossoms alone, his technique had grown more refined, but his Hundred Blossoms had drifted away somewhat from its essential spirit. But now, it had all returned. In fact, because of his growth from experience, Zhang Jiao's Hundred Blossoms playstyle of today was even more careful and precise. Every thread was tightly interwoven, leaking not a single drop. People thought that the Hundred Blossoms playstyle still hadn't emerged in this match. That was a big mistake. In the passageway in midair, those bursting explosions were all the Hundred Blossoms style. And in this kind of space, when the Hundred Blossoms bloomed, there was nowhere to hide. The charging Lord Grimm could only suffer the damage he was supposed to. There were those who thought that the Hundred Blossoms playstyle was supposed to consist of non-stop lights and shadows, flashing until no one could see anything. But this kind of view was too simplistic. The true Hundred Blossoms wasn't placed everywhere, it just could be placed anywhere. Take as an example using lights to block the opponent's vision. Did that require 360 degrees of surrounding? It didn't. What it truly required was nothing more than, in that most critical moment, a sudden expanse of flashes appearing in the opponent's vision. Boom, 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 boom. In such a small space, the explosions were non-stop. For the moment, Lord Grimm had no way of closing in. It seemed like the explosions weren't being continuously strung together, but every time that Ye Xiu prepared to control Lord Grimm to rush forward, a series of explosions would make his vision go blurry. Ye Xiu completely understood that this was intentional. Given that the opponent was able to accomplish this to this extent, he didn't dare blindly charge forward. The space he had was shrinking, and his exits were already cut off. Lord Grimm was right in the middle of the Hundred Blossoms. Chapter 1488, borrow Chapter 1488. Borrow translator. Namiyami editor. Namiyami no holes. Lord Grimm had been trapped, but Ye Xiu's intuition told him that he could only evaluate Zhang Jiao's performance as such. Ye Xiu had been around throughout Zhang Jiao's professional career. He had watched Hundred Blossoms Berserker and Spitfire rise to fame to Blood and Blossom's dominance in the glory scene to Sun Yiping's retirement to Zhang Jiao's bitter walk alone. Ye Xiu had been there the entire time, crossing hands with Zhang Jiao at every step. His thoughts were the same as Sun Jiping's. The current Zhang Jiao was the best that he had ever been because Zhang Jiao had refound his footing. The years of potential that had been bottled up the entire time were finally being put on display. Ye Xiu couldn't find any openings, but that didn't mean he could just keep waiting for one to come. Zhang Jiao wasn't letting out fireworks for Ye Xiu to enjoy. The bullets fired by dazzling 100 blossoms might not be heavy, but all of them dealt damage. The space that Lord Grimm could maneuver around in was getting smaller and smaller, and his injuries were getting heavier and heavier. Charge! Lord Grimm's myriad manifestations umbrella suddenly opened. It seemed like he was planning on tanking the hits to escape from this predicament. But how could Zhang Jiao not have considered such a simple method like tanking the hits with a shield? As soon as Zhang Jiao saw the umbrella open, he immediately responded. A grenade was thrown at the edges of the umbrella's canvas. Then, with a bullet, the grenade was knocked over the umbrella, directly into Lord Grimm's line of sight. There was no time for Ye Xiu to react. The grenade exploded. Remote control grenade. It had less power than the low-level impact grenade, but the user could blow up the grenade manually, naturally making it much easier to set off the explosion at a precise timing. The grenade had leapt over the umbrella shield and exploded. Although the damage dealt was low, it had been a direct hit. The knockback sent Lord Grimm sliding back. With Lord Grimm swaying from the blow, the umbrella shield no longer fully covered him. Zhang Jiao seized the openings and fired all sorts of bullets. Boom, boom, boom. Light and smoke intertwined, forming a dazzling picture of 100 flowers blossoming. Lord Grimm had been swallowed by the brilliant light. All that could be seen was a blurry figure. Zhang Jiao didn't relax and continued to throw out attacks at Lord Grimm up until even that blur could no longer be seen. The attacks suddenly stopped. Zhang Jiao realized that Lord Grimm's health wasn't going down. How is that possible? There had been no place for him to dodge or block. Lord Grimm had been cornered. The artillery barrage stopped. The light dissipated. All that remained were remnant flames and smoke. In this enclosed space, the thick smoke would take a while to disperse, but he was able to see what he needed to see. A hole had appeared in that corner of the room. Zhang Jiao instantly understood what had transpired. The walls were sturdy but no indestructible. It just needed enough attacks. Ye Xiu had made a feint, baiting Zhang Jiao to launch a fierce counterattack. By borrowing the artillery barrage and the cover of the dazzling light, he broke through the sturdy wall and escaped. Lord Grimm had taken a considerable amount of damage to pull this off. Only 19% of his health remained. However, in what seemed to be an inescapable position, Ye Xiu had been able to force an opening. He really is hard to deal with. Zhang Jiao couldn't remember just how many times he had thought this in the past. Zhai, a door from the other end opened. The other side of the wall was the neighboring room. Ye Xiu acted decisively, immediately launching a counterattack. Zhang Jiao had dazzling 100 blossoms turned towards that entrance and started attacking wildly. As soon as a figure could be seen, the light engulfed him. However, the figure appeared shorter than usual was knocked down a lot faster. More importantly, Lord Grimm's health hadn't gone down. Zhang Jiao realized that the situation wasn't good. He quickly turned back, but Lord Grimm had already closed the distance. Lord Grimm had dashed out from that broken hole. As for what had pushed open the door, it was a goblin. The goblin had distracted Zhang Jiao for just an instant, but an instant was enough. Lord Grimm had left behind a shadow as he came through the hole in the wall. He had used shadow clone technique, his fastest movement option, to instantly close the distance. Dazzling 100 blossoms was knocked into the air. The myriad manifestations umbrella transformed in a blur as the unspecialized blitz began. Blood splattered into the air. Close combat resulted in this sort of bloody fight. Dazzling 100 blossoms' health slid downwards rapidly. He hadn't taken any damage previously, So everyone thought that Zhang Jiao would be able to end this match without losing much health, evening up the disadvantage left by Qin Mayan's defeat. But in the end, he hadn't been able to take care of Ye Xiu in one wave. 19%. The remaining health on Lord Grimm came back to bite him. Would he be swept away by Lord Grimm's combo? Everyone started worrying for Zhang Jiao. Ye Xiu's unspecialized had done this too many times in the regular season. Just one bite, and he would never let go. Zhang Jiao obviously understood this point. Ye Xiu had undoubtedly been their main focus point in their research on Happy. He was an old rival that Team Tyranny was incomparably familiar with, but he just had to switch classes. It had truly been a headache for them. A class change meant a change in playstyle. However, a person's experience, intuition, knowledge, habits, etc. wouldn't change. Team Tyranny's Han Wenkin had fought with Ye Xiu for 10 years. Zhang Jiao and Lin Jinyan were the alliance's second generation of players. The players, who were most familiar with Ye Xiu and had fought against Ye Xiu the most times, were coincidentally all from Team Tyranny. The complexity of the unspecialized class put them in a bind just the same as everyone else, but in terms of grasping Ye Xiu's thoughts, no one else had more of an advantage than them. Time would take away things, but also leave them with things. Take me out in one combo. Zhang Jiao was the only one, apart from Ye Xiu, who had experienced 4 finals. No one had as much experience at the apex of glory as much as these two had. Zhang Jiao had gotten second place all 4 times. The experience had tempered his heart even further. He had experienced the greatest setback 4 times. It was just a single up and down in one small part of a match. For him, it was insignificant. The second he had been launched into the air, he began resisting. While in the air, dazzling 100 blossoms kept throwing down grenades as if Lord Grimm was a piggy bank. No one had expected Zhang Jiao to actually launch such a powerful counterattack from a disadvantaged airborne state. There were a few grenades that Ye Xiu had no choice but to deal with, but most of them couldn't be dealt with if he wanted to keep his offense going. Grenades poured from the sky. Amidst the blooming light, Lord Grimm tenaciously moved. This sort of powerful counterattack didn't force him back. To think that he would insist on continuing his attacks. Everyone was astonished. Tyranny's Han Wenking, who had never known the word retreat, had backed down in front of Ye Xiu today. But now, it was Ye Xiu who bravely stood his ground in this situation like Han Wenking would. A trade. The pro players watching the match such as Yu Wenzhou, Huang Xiaoshan, Sun Zhiping all saw through it. Apart from the grenades that would disrupt his offense, Ye Xiu would do his best to dodge the grenades while dealing as much damage as possible to dazzling 100 blossoms. A trade was a standard group arena method. What Ye Xiu sought wasn't a victory this round, but to pave the road to victory for his next teammate. Isn't he just trying to make things easier for himself? Huang Xiaoshan messaged Yu Wenzhou. Maybe, Yu Wenzhou replied. Some of the viewers watching were hoping to see Zhang Jiao break open the situation. Others were hoping to see Ye Xiu end the fight in one wave. However, the experts all knew that this round would end in a trade. Finally, Lord Grimm fell. Dazzling 100 Blossoms had 61% of his health left. Victory. In the group arena, it was a bit difficult to say who truly won. Ye Xiu had lost, but he had taken out 39% of his opponent's health, keeping Happy in the lead. Zhang Jiao had won, but compared to the expectations towards him when he had cornered Lord Grimm, the outcome was somewhat disappointing. Pan Lin and Li Yibo usually gave a summary or a few comments after a round ended, but right now, the two were sidetracking the main topic. This individual round seemed brilliant and straightforward. Everything had been directly observed by them, but just talking about those points made the two feel they weren't being thorough enough for some reason. What were they missing? The two were puzzled. As Ye Xiu walked down from the stage, the crowd clapped in approval. This outcome was acceptable, especially that last comeback. It was a bit unfortunate that he wasn't able to take down Zhang Jiao in one wave, but facing these tyrants, hoping for a 1v2 was too much. Who would Happy field next? The audience applauded as they fixed their gaze on the big screen. They wanted to know who Happy's next player was. Mo Fan. The name appeared. Mo Fan, known as the Godslayer, had a stable position in Happy's group arena lineup, and his style was recognized by many as very suitable for the group arena. After his name appeared on the big screen, Mo Fan got up and headed towards the stage. Along the way, he walked past Ye Xiu, but none of them said anything. They just nodded to express, "I see you." Pan Lin and Li Yibo wasn't sure how to summarize the previous round, so they shifted the subject to the next round. The Godslayer facing the 61% health Zhang Jiao. Pan Lin said thoughtfully. Though their starting health wasn't even, if Mo Fan won, another name would be added to the Godslayer's list of kills. Chapter 1489 Crazy 100 Blossoms Chapter 1489 Crazy 100 Blossoms Translator Namiyami Editor. Namiyami. When Mo Fan came onto the stage, everyone's first thought was his title Godslayer. Their second thought was the cold and cheerless chat. For Mo Fan, it wasn't even a question of not speaking much. He didn't speak at all. Even Ye Xiu felt astonished because when he first met Mo Fan in the game, it was true that Mo Fan didn't speak much, but he wasn't completely silent like he was in real life. It seemed like he was the type who could communicate in virtual worlds, but when it came to real life, he wouldn't say a word. After he became a pro, he would practically never speak in the game either. Was it because he was so invested into the game that he couldn't differentiate between fantasy and reality? Ye Xiu didn't know, and he had no way to ask. Communicating with him was hard. Soon afterwards, the match began. Zhang Jiao was the type of player who would occasionally say a few words. In the fight with Ye Xiu, apart from "you come in, you come out," when the two were stuck, there were no other interactions between the two players. Relatively few words had been spoken that round. This round, facing the taciturn Mo Fan, Zhang Jiao also became quiet. "There's surprisingly little talking between the players today," Li Yibo sighed. He had thought that because Ye Xiu and Tyranny's old generals had known each other for a long time, there would be quite a bit of trash talking between them. As it turned out, Ye Xiu and Zhang Jiao bickered childishly for a bit, and then that was it. "There probably won't be a lot of talking this round," Pan Lin followed up. Mo Fan never speaking was common knowledge. The two players remained silent. Both players chose to take the middle road, moving towards the manor, one from the front, one from the back. "Are all of today's fights going to be decided in this manner?" Pan Lin joked. Zhang Jiao's dazzling 100 Blossoms took the same route as the previous round. He went in from the manor's back door and walked through the rooms in the first floor. Compared to last round, he had a better understanding of the layout of the rooms, so he walked more confidently. As for Mo Fan, Deception didn't enter through the main entrance. This time, a real ninja had taken the field. With skillful ninjato technique, Deception climbed onto the roof. The further dazzling 100 Blossoms went in, the more careful he became. He needed to be ready for the opponent to appear at any moment. Meanwhile, Deception moved along the rooftop swiftly. Just when everyone thought that he would go through the hole in the roof from the Ye Xiu and Qin Maiyun battle, he went directly towards the back of the manor. After cautiously peering downwards, he jumped off the roof soundlessly. Deception had made his way across the manor to where dazzling 100 Blossoms had been initially. Then, he went in. Tyranny's fans in Xiaoshan Stadium went into an uproar. Going all the way across the manor to circle to the back of the opponent was truly too despicable. Tyranny's fans looked down on such an action. Even if they looked down on it, they couldn't help but worry for Zhang Jiao because Zhang Jiao clearly didn't realize what had happened. His vision was focused on where Mo Fan might be if he came through the front door. Mo Fan's Deception entered the manor and started his search, quickly checking room after room. Deception was slowly getting closer to dazzling 100 blossoms. Happy's fans were excited. Sneak attacks. It wasn't possible to kill the opponent in one strike, but the important part was that when the sneak attack came, the opponent would be flustered. To the viewers, it was an enjoyable sight. Deception was getting closer and closer. Zhang Jiao hadn't noticed yet. He was on the lookout for Mo Fan, but he had completely ignored his backside. The doors were opened gently. To avoid startling the snake by beating the grass, the two were careful with their every action. Although the two hadn't come across each other yet, the two acted like their opponent was in the next room. But this time, dazzling 100 blossoms opening and closer of the door was caught by Mo Fan. With a stride forward, Deception had arrived at the door that dazzling 100 blossoms had just closed and gently opened it. Mo Fan was familiar with the layout of the manor. Once dazzling 100 blossoms entered this room, he probably wouldn't look back. This room had only one other exit, and dazzling 100 blossoms could only move in that direction. Deception had activated the disappearing body technique as he rolled into the room. He got up and sprinted soundlessly towards dazzling 100 blossoms as his two hands quickly formed seals. Ninjutsu, flickering pursuit. Deception became a blur. It was only then did Zhang Jiao notice, but it was too late. Deception struck dazzling 100 blossoms. Oh! The anxiousness, excitement, and suspense that had been pent up when Deception crossed the manor was let out all at once. This was the thrill of an ambush. This sort of excitement couldn't be found in any other way. Empty cicada double kill, flame cut, annihilation. Deception followed with 3 consecutive skills, all of them landing and launching dazzling 100 blossom into the air. But getting hit into the air had actually given Zhang Jiao an opportunity to respond. He immediately dropped a grenade. Grenades were AI attacks. As long as Zhang Jiao had a general idea of Deception's position, it was enough for him to attack. As for Deception, he dashed and jumped. Then he borrowed the wall to jump back. This series of fast and fluid movements allowed Deception to dodge dazzling 100 blossoms grenade. Damn! Surprise flashed through Zhang Jiao's mind. He had been surprised again and again by Ye Xiu. One round later, he was surprised again by another opponent, Happy's Mo Fan. Countless flashes of light accompanied his surprise. Poo 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 poo. As dazzling 100 blossoms fell, Deception jumped and stomped on him. After Storm Shuriken, he followed with a bird fall. Dazzling 100 blossoms crashed to the ground. The entire room seemed to tremble. After Deception's bird fall, he wanted to borrow the momentum to run. For him, the combo had been long enough. It was time for him to stop and adjust the tempo, but the momentum was unexpectedly too much. Boom! Deception crashed into the ceiling, but he didn't immediately start free-falling down. Instead, it was like he was stuck to the ceiling. To be more precise, he was pushed. Deception wasn't the only one pushed. The furnishings in the room were pushed askew. The more fragile objects shattered into pieces. Implosion grenade. The implosion grenade had set off at the perfect timing. It had exploded the instant dazzling 100 blossoms fell to the ground. In this room, apart from dazzling 100 blossoms, nothing else was left untouched. Deception wanted to escape, but because of the push from implosion grenade, he was pushed to the ceiling. Because of the limited space, the force from the implosion grenade wasn't able to completely proliferate outwards, which was why Deception was stuck to the ceiling, unable to get down. It was just for a short instant, but it was enough for dazzling 100 blossoms to shoot who knew how many bullets. As the bullets flew, a grenade was thrown. In the blink of an eye, Deception was swallowed by the light. Soon afterwards, he was back onto the ground, but dazzling 100 blossom followed him down. The bullets continued to barrage him. On the ceiling, a charred strawman could be seen. No one gave it another glance, only the broadcast gave it a close-up. Substitution technique. Although Deception was able to get to the ground, he wasn't able to escape from dazzling hundred blossoms' pursuit. The room had two exits. Mo Fan could only look on helplessly at them. His deception had no way of reaching them. Not only could he not reach them, to reduce the damage he took, he had to retreat away from them. Similar to what Ye Xiu had experienced last round, the blooming net of gunfire would force the target to the corner. Then, amidst the beautiful blossoms, the target would be killed. At the end, Ye Xiu was able to borrow dazzling hundred blossoms' firepower to break a hole through the wall. But Mo Fan, what could Mo Fan do? Ye Xiu's previous method of escaping wouldn't work a second time. Zhang Jiao wasn't stupid. Mo Fan could only rely on his own methods. Deception suddenly retreated back all the way. He hadn't been forced to do so, it was a display of attitude. Zhang Jiao promptly adjusted his aim. This short window was an opening for Mo Fan, an opening that let deception finish several hand seals. Ninjutsu, shadow dance. Mo Fan was able to complete the hand seals for a level 70 skill in just an instant. One deception turned into 10. The one that had been in the corner was instantly swallowed by the blinding light. It wasn't a big room. For claustrophobic viewers, these 10 identical clones made them feel nauseous. "He's going to use the chaos to run," Pan Lin shouted. "Using a high-level skill just to escape, Mo Fan is quite wasteful," Li Yibo sighed. For a scrap picker, safety was number one. It didn't matter what had to be used to guarantee his safety, it would be worth it. 10 deceptions. Which one was real? There was no way to tell because the heart of shadow dance could be switched around at any time. Zhang Jiao's only choice seemed to be to guard those two exits. But the other side wasn't just going to line up and rush towards those two exits to die. If deception used a few attacks to harass dazzling hundred blossoms, wouldn't that make it easier for him to escape? How difficult. The tyranny fans acted as if they were in Zhang Jiao's position. Their brows were furrowed, and they looked as if they were at wit's end. But then they saw the entire room blossom with light. If it was said that in the previous round no one was able to see that crazy hundred blossom style, then in this round everyone saw 100 blossoms that was even crazier than in their imaginations. The entire room filled with light. Dazzling hundred blossoms. 10 deceptions. All that remained were blurry silhouettes. The projection technology could intelligently remove objects blocking the viewer's sights, but it did not obstruct the visual effects from the characters' attacks. Who cared if there were 10 deceptions? Who cared if there were 2 exits? Who cared about enemy harass? He would simply strike at every corner of the room, leaving deception no place to hide. Even though he had returned to his roots, that didn't mean he had forgotten that wildness from those 2.5 seasons. 100 blossoms to burn away everything in his path. At that time he had believed in it, and now when he needed it, he wouldn't give up on trying it. The 3 summers of wild blossoms, which had once attempted to burn everything down, bloomed again in this little room. Chapter 1490, Escape Isn't the Goal. Chapter 1490. Escape Isn't the Goal. Translator. Namiyami Editor. Namiyami. It was as if a flash grenade had been thrown at the audience. Trying to figure out what those blurry figures were doing amidst the dazzling light required rich experience. Zhang Jiao's experience at doing so was second to none. If the 100 blossom style blinded even him, then that would be heaven's biggest joke. Several blurry figures instantly vanished. It just looked like random flashes, but there was purpose behind each flash. No matter how skilled Zhang Jiao was, there was no way for him to use a single skill to cover all 4 corners simultaneously. The light that enshrouded the room, whether real, fake, attacks, or feints, was carefully arranged by Zhang Jiao. Unable to differentiate between what was real and what was fake, how could Mo Fan's deception escape? Practically no one believed he could. They couldn't even see what was happening inside as spectators. How could Mo Fan fare any better? They were gravely mistaken. Mo Fan was completely different from them, and the one who felt it most clearly was Mo Fan's opponent, Zhang Jiao. The 100 blossoms had only just bloomed when he noticed that Mo Fan had started making adjustments towards his shadow clones. The viewers had vaguely observed that several shadows had vanished in an instant. It was 4. Zhang Jiao knew the exact number. Then, another 4. Mo Fan was trying to break apart dazzling 100 blossoms of fence. He didn't get confused by the blinding light, quickly figuring out what was real and what was not. For most viewers, everything was a blur to them. But to Mo Fan, this chaos wasn't nearly enough to confuse him. He had faced countless chaotic situations before. This chaos was never from just one or two people, but a group of them. When he had searched for a way to escape from predicaments as a scrap picker, the obstructions weren't from just one or two classes, but rather a variety of classes. Chaotic? Not at all. Mo Fan's life as a scrap picker had been chaotic. Zhang Jiao's 100 blossom style had structure. 4 shadows split apart and then another 4. Damn! Mo Fan had surprised Zhang Jiao again. His 100 blossoms encirclement had been broken through, and the reason was because his attacks had structure to them. And the structure had been grasped by Mo Fan. If Ye Xiu had done it, perhaps Zhang Jiao wouldn't have been so surprised, but he was currently facing a young rookie. The kid's got talent in this area. Sun Zhiping smiled from the audience. He was no longer teammates with Zhang Jiao. Otherwise, he would have certainly warned Zhang Jiao. Mo Fan's skill at escaping was far greater than anyone could imagine. Even with the 100 blossom style, trying to trap him would require even more focus. Mo Fan had grown in chaos. Scrap picker. Sun Zhiping also felt interested, thinking of Mo Fan's background. There had never been any pro players now or in the past who had that sort of background. It was the result of a person training what they were best at in the most suitable environment for them. The outcome was superb and didn't lack individuality. It wasn't something that could be molded from the pipeline-like training camps of the pro clubs. He possessed godlike skill in his expertise. When Sun Zhiping had been at Happy, he and Ye Xiu had privately acknowledged it. And at that time, Mo Fan couldn't even fit in with the team. Now, he was expanding his expertise. Not only would it be used for scrap picking, but for PvP on the pro stage. If he became more all-rounded and flexible, not like how rigid his playstyle was right now, a god of a new generation would certainly appear. But with his personality, would he be able to round out his playstyle? When Sun Zhiping had been unhappy, Ye Xiu had already been worried about this issue. But even if it didn't turn out to be successful, Mo Fan would still be a formidable player. Godslayer. That wasn't a coincidence or a joke. When the battle shifted towards his domain, he could crush even gods. If he doesn't notice this, he'll definitely be eaten. Sun Zhiping thought in his heart. On stage, the sound of a door opening. Inside and outside were two different worlds. One side was chaotic, the other side was calm. Deception had reached the outside. He had escaped to the calm side. The crowd cheered loudly. Godslayer, Happy's fans shouted excitedly. It was as if Mo Fan wasn't escaping from a predicament, but rather that he had killed his opponent in one hit. Their cheers also showed just how nervous Happy's fans had been. Tyranny's fans sighed, seeing his astonishing escape. To think he could escape, and to think it would be so normal, opening the door and running out. Was Zhang Jiao too old? He couldn't even suppress a rookie. Quite a few people had these sort of thoughts. Even Pan Lin and Li Yibo wanted to say it, but in the end they only said that Zhang Jiao was a bit slower than Mo Fan. Why was he slower? Because he was getting older. The two didn't say these words, but Sun Zhiping laughed. He didn't care who won or lost this match, but when he saw his former teammate performing well, he couldn't help but smile. How steady! Sun Zhiping's gaze was focused on dazzling 100 blossoms and the light that hadn't yet dissipated. Mo Fan was able to find an opening in the 100 blossoms through his scrap-picking skills, but he was no longer a scrap picker. He was a pro player and he was constantly fixing his habits. As a result, besides escaping, he had another choice. Attack the opponent. Escape didn't mean he won. The only way to win was to kill the opponent. Mo Fan knew this point clearly. Gradually, killing the opponent became a higher priority than escaping. When he had broken through the chaos, Mo Fan's first thought was no longer to escape, but to use the opening he saw to attack his opponent. But this time, he had chosen deception to escape because he couldn't find an opportunity to attack. After the disturbances from the 8 shadows, a huge adjustment was made to the 100 blossoms. It still covered the room and alternated between real and fake. However, dazzling 100 blossoms had erected an impenetrable defense. As a result, Mo Fan could not choose to attack. He could only run away. The 2 players knew of this detail, and so did the pro players watching. But besides them, the rest were discussing how Zhang Jiao was slower. Zhang Jiao, who they had just commented on being slow, suddenly sped up. The light and shadow from the 100 blossom style seemed to flow out of that door to the next room. Kaka, the shockwaves kept pushing the door. It wanted to close, but it could never close, constantly making an uncomfortable noise. Deception was hastily running away. Mo Fan hadn't thought that Zhang Jiao would chase after him so quickly. But a few steps later, he realized that not only was his opponent pursuing him quickly, his opponent was pursuing him closely. Bullets, grenades, explosions, smoke, light, all of these seemed to be following him as if they were stuck to deception's feet. In countless hero movies, there was always a hero who ran around freely amidst a field of explosions, but the explosions would never hit. Deception was running madly, but the explosions kept following him. If this were a movie, the audience would have probably left their seats by now, seeing these narrow escapes again and again. I can't get him off of me. Mo Fan was surprised. This was what he was best at, but right now, he couldn't get away from the pursuit. The dazzling light was like a wave that swept away everything behind deception. Mo Fan's deception couldn't stop. He even felt like there wasn't enough time to look back. On the pro stage, there were at most 5v5 team battles, which couldn't compare to the chaos that a scrap picker experienced in the game. However, he had never experienced such a crazed pursuit in the game. He couldn't stop even for a second. If he stopped, the light would swallow him. Although Mo Fan had successfully escaped from that encirclement, that didn't mean he could replicate that success. Both sides were people, not NPCs. Just because it worked once didn't mean it would work again. I need to get away. Mo Fan seemed to have returned to the former days where he would have countless people chasing after him. But he was sure that even in those situations, he had never felt such pressure before. Mo Fan's deception had been able to escape from those situations again and again. But this time, facing this one person's pursuit, Mo Fan's deception fell. Escape isn't the goal. The only goal is to beat the opponent, Sun Jiping sighed in his heart. He was happy about Zhang Jiao's outstanding plays, but he also felt regret seeing Mo Fan's defeat. Zhang Jiao, 1v2. He had beaten a half-health Ye Xiu and the Godslayer Mo Fan. The advantage that Ye Xiu had established was wiped away. Now Team Tyranny had a 27% health advantage in this group arena. The stadium was silent. Happy's fans hadn't expected this outcome. In the end, Zhang Jiao was able to chase Mo Fan down to his death. This was their home field, yet they were lagging behind. At this moment, Happy's third player stood up. "It looks like it's my time to shine," Fang Rui said. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com, Chapter 1491. Cloud Wind Body, Chapter 1491. Cloud Wind Body Translator. Namyami Editor. Namyami lost. It wasn't Mo Fan's first time losing, but the loss this time stunned him. He had been chased to death by his opponent for 2 minutes 34 seconds. He had everything he could think of, yet he had still failed to escape. He went out of the player booth slowly and walked down from the stage slowly. As he passed Fang Rui, he made no reaction towards Fang Rui's "I'll take revenge for you." When he returned to his seats and passed by Ye Xiu, he heard Ye Xiu say, "Your thoughts are still too single-minded. Some people's play styles were too single-minded. Some people's techniques were too single-minded." As for Mo Fan, Ye Xiu criticized him for his thoughts being too single-minded. Mo Fan didn't reply back. He sat down at his seat in the corner and reflected on these words. Fang Rui received a warm welcome from Happy's fans. As they cheered, he strutted around as if Happy wasn't the team falling behind right now. He walked onto the stage, waving his hands towards the crowd as if he had won. It was only until the referee rushed over and berated him did he go into the player booth dejectedly. The crowd laughed. The tense atmosphere from Zhang Jiao's 1v2 had lightened considerably. The match began. The public chat had been very calm previously, but Fang Rui's presence changed that. "How mighty, 1v2, Fang Rui gave praise towards Zhang Jiao. "It's not over yet," Zhang Jiao replied. "It pretty much is," Fang Rui said. As the two chatted, their characters moved. The middle road again. There was plenty of content spread throughout the map, but up until now, all of them had taken place inside the central manor. Every fight had been spectacular, though, so there were no complaints from the viewers. On the other hand, Pan Lin and Li Yibo were analyzing Happy's reasons for choosing this map. So far, it looked like Happy's players were more comfortable because of their familiarity with the map, but it hadn't given them any definite advantage yet. Of course, there were a lot of factors in winning a match. Relying on the home game advantage was just one factor. Boundless Sea and Dazzling 100 Blossoms quickly reached the front and back of the manor, respectively. Dazzling 100 Blossoms didn't hesitate and went through the rear door. Zhang Jiao had made the same choice in all three of his fights. As for Boundless Sea, Fang Rui looked to have a plan in mind. He opened the front door and strolled leisurely into the manor as if he were here to tour the place. But the more attentive viewers had noticed that Boundless Sea's mana was dropping steadily. He had evidently activated a skill that continuously drained his mana. What was it? Cloud Wind Body, Pan Lin shouted out. Cloud Wind Body was a Chi Master high-level scouting skill. In the game, there would be a radar-like map in his view. When a character entered its range, the user would receive a notification. But if that was all it did, the skill's value was too worthless compared to the mana it consumed. Cloud Wind Body increased the user's perception and also gave the user more precise control over their chi. More precise control meant auto-targeting. This effect seemed too amazing, but in reality, very few Chi Masters chose to use Cloud Wind Body. Sure, auto-targeting was nice, but that didn't mean the user attacked any faster. Their attacks could still be interrupted. In the majority of Chi Masters' eyes, the low-level reinforced iron bones was more practical. In the team competition against Blue Rain, Fang Rui's Boundless Sea had relied on reinforced iron bones at a crucial moment to great success. But in today's match, he had chosen to use a high mana consumption skill like Cloud Wind Body, but the effects weren't anything impressive. Fang Rui isn't hesitating to use Cloud Wind Body to quickly locate Dazzling 100 Blossoms. It doesn't seem necessary. Pan Lin had his doubts. It was a 1v1 group arena. There was no need to quickly kill the opponent. Fang Rui didn't need to be so impatient. Li Yibo didn't say anything. Although he had the same doubts as Pan Lin, he decided that it would be better to wait and observe some more before further analysis. Boundless Sea still looked like he was touring around the manor leisurely with Cloud Wind Body activated, but his movement speed had clearly increased. He wanted to minimize the mana consumption. The viewers with their omniscient view watched as the two characters gradually drew nearer, but because of the walls, neither side could see each other. However, with Cloud Wind Body activated, he could use Chi to sense his surroundings. On his radar, a little blip had appeared representing Dazzling 100 Blossoms. Fang Rui didn't immediately launch an attack like everyone had thought he would. Instead, his movements made everyone confused. Does he want to ambush Zhang Jiao? Pan Lin guessed. Fang Rui's signature style was being dirty. An ambush was nothing surprising for him. Li Yibo remained silent. He looked at Boundless Sea's movements but couldn't see any places for him to set up an ambush. But if he wasn't going for an ambush, what else could he be doing? Just when he asked this question to himself, Boundless Sea suddenly stopped. On his radar, dazzling 100 blossoms, little dot was clearly moving. Boundless Sea raised his hands and gathered chi. This is, spirit reaches to the rainbow, Pan Lin noted. The Chi Master's awakening skill, spirit reaches to the rainbow, gathered chi and circulated it throughout the body. Boundless Sea's clothes looked to be fluttering violently in the wind as his entire body seemed to ignite into flames. What is he doing? He wants to attack from there. Pan Lin was utterly confused. Boundless Sea and dazzling 100 blossoms were separated by a wall. There was no door on this wall. There was no way for him to launch a sneak attack. Li Yibo's heart trembled. Zoom in. He called out to the broadcast director. The camera zoomed in, but Li Yibo's gaze wasn't on Boundless Sea, but the wall in front. The large section of the wallpaper was peeling off. The bricks that could be seen were covered with cracks. This was damage left over from the previous 2 battles. Attacks from dazzling 100 blossoms, Lord Grimm, or Deception might have landed here. Li Yibo couldn't remember right now, but he knew that this wall had already been damaged heavily. Fang Rui's ambush would succeed because Boundless Sea's attack would pierce through this wall, and Zhang Jiao probably wasn't aware of it. The dot on the radar continued to move towards this area. Boundless Sea's clothes continued to flutter wildly, even making some sound, but this sound wasn't loud enough to pass through the wall for Zhang Jiao to hear. Closer. Everyone knew what was about to happen. They could already picture it in their heads. The broadcast had already found the most suitable viewing angle. The dot flashed again. Dazzling 100 blossoms and Boundless Sea were now as close as possible. Spirit reaches to the rainbow. Fang Rui didn't disappoint and attacked. The chi gathered in his body poured out. With a boom, the wall collapsed. Zhang Jiao was startled. Boundless Sea's spirit reaches to the rainbow tore through the wall, the glaring light flying towards him. Roll. Dazzling 100 blossoms rolled to the side. It was a conditioned reflex for an experienced pro player to roll facing a dangerous situation where there was no time to think. However, no matter how fast he moved, he couldn't escape from the system's auto-targeting. The spirit reaches to the rainbow adjusted in the air according to dazzling 100 blossoms movements and crashed into him. The focused chi instantly exploded. It wasn't just beautiful, it also dealt frightening damage. The nearby ornaments instantly shattered. Up until spirit reaches to the rainbow hit the target, Fang Rui didn't deactivate his cloud wind body, so the skill would automatically lock onto the target. Zhang Jiao's instinctive reaction was no match for the system's auto-targeting, but because of the wall, the damage from the attack had lessened. The attack only took away 6% of dazzling 100 blossoms' health, but this was just the start of Boundless Sea's attacks. After a spirit reaches to the rainbow, he instantly closed the distance. Once the chi scattered from the explosion, silence didn't follow. Before the chi completely scattered, a new wave of chi shot out from Boundless Sea's palms. Time seemed to have frozen. All people could see was Boundless Sea's surging chi raging thunderously in this little room. Finally, when everything became peaceful again, the system announced, "Glory! Fang Rui's Boundless Sea had won." The audience was dumbfounded. A full health Fang Rui bringing down a 27% health Zhang Jiao wasn't surprising. The surprise was from the way he did it. Ambushed to death in one combo. Was this dirty or tyrannical? No one was sure. You could say it was dirty, but that explosive burst of chi was very heroic. You could say that it was tyrannical, but hiding behind a wall and gathering chi was very dirty in any case. Happy had won this round. It was a clean victory, chasing back the advantage that Zhang Jiao had gained. If Fang Rui's previous interactions with the crowd had eased the crowd's tension, then his dominating performance this round was a tranquilizer to Happy's fans. After the shock from such a clean victory, Happy's fans recovered. Their excited cheers resonated throughout the entire Xiaoshan Stadium. Chapter 1492, Harmony. Chapter 1492, Harmony. Translator, Namiyami. Editor, Namiyami. Zhang Jiao left the player booth. Despite the cheers for his defeat, he was calm. This loss was too insignificant for him. There was no loser in glory more pitiful than him. Zhang Jiao walked down slowly from the stage. The cheers from the crowd continued, accompanied with quite a few boos towards him as well. After his return, his popularity had dropped considerably. Team Tyranny's third player stood up from his seat. The display on the big screen amply switched to an image of the player and character. Lin Jingyan, Brawler, Dark Thunder. He had been a part of Tyranny for 2 whole years, but even now, whenever Lin Jingyan saw his name alongside his character Dark Thunder, he would always feel a sense of unfamiliarity. 3 hits. In the end, he couldn't forget the name of the brawler that he had traveled through wind and rain with for 7 years. Even though the two of them had never obtained any glorious achievements, he would always feel at peace controlling that character. 2 years ago, that peace was finally broken. At the end of his career, Lin Jingyan became a drifting leaf, finally settling at Tyranny. Lin Jingyan was grateful for Tyranny. During his most bitter moments, the team had looked highly upon him. He had decided that he would give the final light of his career to Tyranny. But in the end, what was different was different. Lin Jingyan, Dark Thunder. As Lin Jingyan walked, he looked at the name on the screen and then at his opponent, Fang Rui, Qi Master, Boundless Sea. Lin Jingyan suddenly laughed. The fate of these 2 brothers were so similar. A different name accompanied Fang Rui too. Fang Rui had even switched classes. Lin Jingyan didn't only feel uncomfortable looking at the name Dark Thunder, he also felt uncomfortable looking at the name Boundless Sea. Fang Rui, Thief, Doubtful Demon. It was almost like he could see these names in front of him. Lin Jingyan shook his head. Am I getting too nostalgic? Take revenge for me, Zhang Jiao said as he passed by him. I'll do my best. Lin Jingyan smiled. Good luck. Zhang Jiao didn't say anything else. Lin Jingyan walked onto the stage and entered the player booth. He swiped his card and loaded into the match. He had repeated these motions who knew how many times in these 9 years, 7 years with 3 hits, 2 years with Dark Thunder. Dark Thunder. Lin Jingyan repeated the name of his character again. He loaded into the map and the match officially began. Both characters took the middle road again. The audience was getting a little restless. Wasn't this the 6th round of the group arena already? Up until now, no player had taken a roundabout route. All of them went straight towards the center. The manor wasn't a manor anymore, but an arena. Then, one player at the front of the manor, while the other player at the back of the manor. Except, this time, the 2 players finally chose to do something new. Not through the door or onto the walls. Lin Jingyan's Dark Thunder went counterclockwise from the back of the manor, while Fang Rui's Boundless Sea went counterclockwise from the front of the manor. Dark Thunder arrived at the front of the manor. Boundless Sea arrived at the back of the manor. Then the 2 went in cautiously through the door. Everyone was speechless. These 2 former partners had become opponents, yet the 2 were still in harmony. You're circling around. I'll circle around. You're going counterclockwise. I'll go counterclockwise. You're going through the door. I'll go through the door. The 2 characters tiptoed their way through the manor as if they were mirrors of each other. The audience was helpless. They could only wait for the 2 to run into each other. But it was as if these 2 guys had made an agreement not to meet. The 2 had wandered through the first floor of the manor for a minute, yet neither side saw even a glimpse of the other. Afterwards, the 2 seemed to be tired. They crouched down at a corner and took a breather. At this moment, the public chat was put to use. Hey, are you in the manor? Fang Rui asked. Yeah, Lin Jingyan replied. He didn't ask the same question back. The way Fang Rui asked the question made it clear that he was in the manner too. How did you start the match? Fang Rui went straight to the point. I circled around to the front. Lin Jingyan went straight to the point. The playoffs was a death match, yet the two were chatting so nonchalantly. It was as if this was normal day-to-day practice. Fuck. Fang Rui cursed. The referee immediately jumped out, giving him a yellow card. Swear words were not permitted. Lin Jingyan immediately understood. He didn't need to ask. Fang Rui had definitely circled around to the back. Their actions were equivalent to swapping positions. They had the same thought: avoid getting caught and carefully scout the surroundings. I avoid you, you avoid me, and so the two went in circles, unable to find each other. Keep going. Lin Jingyan was determined to resolve this predicament. Both sides were incomparably familiar with each other's habits and thoughts. To outpredict the other, just predicting one step ahead wouldn't be enough because the other side would also predict one step ahead. As a result, neither of them would be able to get the right prediction. Dark Thunder stood up from the corner, taking the lead. Lin Jingyan switched perspectives, imagining what Fang Rui would do next. Then he would formulate a plan through deeper reads. The two characters started going in circles again. Another minute passed. This time the two didn't disappoint them. The two players met at the spiraling staircase. The encounter wasn't sudden, instead seeming very natural, as if the two had agreed to rendezvous here at a certain time. The two took their own paths and finally met. Finally, some fighting. The viewers' thoughts to themselves. But the two just stared at each other. To think they would bump into each other here. What did that mean? It meant the two were still in harmony. They had a deep understanding of each other, so they tried to outpredict each other. But in the end, their predictions were at the same depth. Roman 20, Fang Rui cursed, typing Roman 20. The corner of the referee's mouth twitched. Roman 20 wasn't a violation of the rules, but it was obvious that the Roman 20 had the same meaning as fuck. Fang Rui didn't say any profanities, but he got the idea across. The two stared at each other for a good 3 seconds. Besides Fang Rui's Roman 20, neither said anything. Suddenly, the two acted simultaneously. Chi bullet, sand toss. Each player used a long-ranged skill. They launched their attacks at the same time and dodged at the same time. In the end, neither side was hit by the other's attack. Again, Brawler and Chi Master went back and forth, putting up an intense fight. Everyone watching could feel their jaws drop. Was this a fight? Or was this a synchronized show? Attack, dodge, the two mirrored each other perfectly. You missed, I missed. They went back and forth, appearing more like a dance than a battle. Ahem. After half a minute, Lin Jingyan typed a word into the chat. Dark Thunder's offense suddenly halted. Fang Rui's boundless sea also stopped. They realized where the issue lay. Even though they were good friends, this was the playoffs. They had a responsibility as pro players to help their team win, so they used their familiarity with their opponent, hoping to turn it into a weapon. But since the two had a similar level of understanding of each other, the decision that they made were pretty much the same. Their familiarity didn't become a weapon, instead neutralizing any threat between them. The deep understanding between the two of them obstructed their fight. This wasn't a good feeling. They were proud of their deep understanding of each other, but in this match it became their obstacle. To win this fight, they needed to see who could get rid of this connection, the connection of their past. Another 3-second pause and then attack. The Brawler's tricks and the Chi Master's chi collided. The two started getting hit. You punched me, I'll brick you. The fight was intense, but to the more skilled players it was unbearably rough. This was a match that required understanding of their background. The roughness was because of their familiarity, because both sides knew each other too well, making what methods they had unusable. Instead, attacking without any skill would achieve better results. They weren't supporting each other anymore. Instead, they schemed, plotted, and set up traps, Many players with partners couldn't bear to keep watching. What a cruel competition. To win, the two turned their former understanding and complete trust in one another into all sorts of sinister schemes. Huang Xiaoshan, who had been communicating with Yu Wenzhou throughout the match through text, fell silent. Sun Jiping, Zhang Jiao, Han Wenqing, Zhang Xinji, Ye Xiu, Sima Cheng, all of these people knew what it meant to be partners, but these former partners were destroying everything they had established before. For victory, for glory. Every player had many restraints, but for their dreams they had no choice but to ruthlessly cut off these restraints. As time passed, their health bars dropped. The people who understood the match didn't want to analyze the details. Only people who didn't understand cheered according to the ups and downs of the player that they supported. No matter how cruel it was, all things came to an end. No matter how unwilling you were in the end, there would only ever be one standing in the end. Fang Rui, Qi Master, Boundless Sea. In the end, the screen left only a single name. Lin Jingyan, Brawler, Dark Thunder turned dim as his time was over. The crowd cheered for Fang Rui and for Happy's win. The pro players, watching in the stadium, stood up and applauded. They applauded for a match that didn't have any impressive or brilliant plays. They applauded for the mutual understanding between the two players, for their determination to win. They applauded for their everlasting ambition to be the champions, an ambition that would always be worthy of pride. Chapter 1493, Referee Assistance. Chapter 1493, Referee Assistance. Translator, Namyami. Editor, Namyami. In the end, I still lost. Lin Jingyan sighed as he walked out from the player booth. Although it was a pity, he didn't feel upset. Losing to Fang Rui was an acceptable outcome. After all, he was in his declining years, while Fang Rui was at his peak. In terms of getting rid of the past, it had been 2 years, yet he still could not forget his demon subduer. As for Fang Rui, he had even switched classes. Fang Rui had evidently been more decisive than him in this matter. I really have turned old, while Fang Rui has a long road ahead of him left. Looking towards Happy's seats on the other side, Lin Jingyan felt it was a pity that this was a group arena. Fang Rui was not allowed to leave his seat until his role was over. Lin Jingyan wanted to use this opportunity to give Fang Rui his well wishes. He didn't know if the two of them would ever have another chance to face against each other again on this stage. After gazing in silence at that side for a while, Lin Jingyan walked down from the stage. His well wishes could only remain in his heart. Good luck, my friend. With the end of this fight, the group arena was at the halfway mark. Happy had 3 players left, including Fang Rui. Tyranny only had 2 players left. As Lin Jingyan walked down from the stage, Tyranny's 4th player stood up. Tyranny's Song Qiying, a striker rookie. He had joined this season, steadily maturing. It seemed that he would be Desert Smoke's successor. And in this important playoff stage, Tyranny had the confidence to send him onto the stage. Tyranny was not happy. They had other options besides a rookie. Even so, Song Qiying had been fielded as Tyranny's important 4th player in the group arena. The team's intent to raise him could clearly be seen. However, placing him in this position didn't mean he was the anchor of this group arena. From a certain perspective, fielding him as the 4th player showed Tyranny's attitude towards this group arena. Tyranny's 4th player is Song Qiying. It seems that Tyranny had no plans of ending this group arena with their 4th player. Pan Lin immediately started to analyze this arrangement. In the playoffs, the 4th player was oftentimes the team's core player, trying to win the group arena 4-5 to take a 2-point lead into the team competition. The more aggressive teams would even place their core player 3rd to take a 3-point lead. But Tyranny had placed Song Qiying 4th. It was likely that their 5th player would be their core, Captain Han Wenqing. That would be the most appropriate arrangement. Li Yibo had come from Tyranny, and Tyranny's captain and core player had been Han Wenqing for all 10 years. The The team's captain hadn't changed, and the team's core hadn't changed. As a result, it was hard for the team's temperament to change. Even though Li Yibo had left tyranny many years ago, he still had a good grasp of the team. But today, Han Wenqing avoided Ye Xiu and didn't even take the fourth position, instead fielding Song Qiying. The more familiar one was with the team, the more strange it felt encountering something unexpected. When Pan Lin raised the discussion, Li Yibo stared blankly for a long time before replying. Away teams will often play more conservatively. It was a standard response. Li Yibo had lost confidence in analyzing tyranny as former tyranny player. The tyranny today felt too different. Well, let's see how Song Qiying performs. It's also quite a coincidental matchup. When Song Qiying first appeared this season, he had to face Happy's Fang Rui, Pan Lin said, but Fang Rui shouldn't last much longer. It could be said that Fang Rui had achieved a 1v2. He took down Zhang Jiao's dazzling 100 blossoms using quite a bit of mana. After that, even though he won against Lin Jingyan, it had been a bloody fight. Boundless Sea only had 14% of his health and 11% of his mana left. He was an arrow at the end of his flight. Winning for Fang Rui will be difficult, but with Fang Rui's methods, if Song Qiying is too careless, he'll suffer the consequences, Li Yibo said. It's unlikely that he'll be careless, no, Pan Lin chuckled. Li Yibo laughed as well. The current Song Qiying was no longer the same Song Qiying as when he first fought Fang Rui. It had been an entire season. As one of the favorites to win the title Best Rookie, Song Qiying had received much attention. Although he looked to be Desert Smoke's successor, his personality was quite similar to Tyranny's vice-captain Zhang Xinji. He was careful and meticulous. He was young, but with his personality, how could he be careless? The match began as the two commentators discussed this issue. Song Qiying met their expectations. The match had just started, and his attitude towards the upcoming fight could already be seen. As he traveled, it didn't matter whether the battle would reach these areas. He would still carefully observe them. His line of sight constantly shifted left and right. However, the route he chose was still the middle road. The viewers had given up on seeing a battle in water or a forest in this map, because the manor at the center of the map had indoor rooms, which meant protection to a certain extent. Taking a roundabout route towards the manor had no meaning in this map, which was why neither of the two teams made that sort of choice. One player towards the front of the manor, one player towards the back of the manor. The two players met again in the manor for the 7th time. For someone with a cautious and strict personality like Zhang Xinji, Song Qiying had probably thought out his plan for this fight before he even got onto the stage. When Song Qiying made it to the back of the manor, he didn't go through the back door, nor did he jump onto the roof. Instead, he adeptly searched for a window and went in. The two teams had fought several rounds all inside the manor. Tyranny had a good idea of the structure of the manor by now. When he jumped through the window, he immediately turned up, left, right, checking his surroundings. Song Qiying quickly grasped his present situation. He didn't see Boundless Sea. Afterwards, it looked like he already knew what to do as River Sunset walked towards the right corridor. When he reached the second door along the corridor, he went in. He moved step by step as if he were following steps in a guide. Fang Rui's Boundless Sea was inside the manor too. He didn't have much health nor mana. How could he openly welcome his opponent? Last round, he took a roundabout route to the back of the manor, but he was too in harmony with Lin Jingyan. He didn't want to use the same method twice, though, so he had Boundless Sea climb onto the walls of the manor. He didn't climb to the roof, instead climbing onto a balcony and entering the manor through the second floor. The second floor was much more intact than the first floor. Only 2 battles had taken place here. Ye Xiu and Qin Mayan had fought here. Ye Xiu had launched a surprise attack onto Zhang Jiao here too, but the aftermath of it was just a hole in the floor. Fang Rui had Boundless Sea move towards that hole. When he reached the hole, he took a look at the surroundings. After picking a spot, his Boundless Sea crouched down. Crouch, guarding a tree stump and waiting for rabbits. In vast open maps, this sort of ambush tactic rarely worked. It only had value if you knew the target's pathing. But Fang Rui hadn't done any investigation, yet he still went straight for this hole and crouched there. Everyone started wondering when a system notification would come. If someone just sat there patiently not caring if the opponent actually came or not, how long would the match take? As a result, the Glory had rules to prevent it. The referee could judge according to the circumstances whether the player was complying with the rules and then interfere if necessary. Of course, there needed to be some concrete rules too. The referee couldn't just start interfering as soon as a character hid behind a corner. The referee could interfere after no target was seen for 18 seconds. The players familiar with Glory's rules started helping Fang Rui count. They were familiar with the rules. How could the master of playing dirty Fang Rui not be either? When it became 17 seconds, Boundless Sea switched postures. Glory's referees weren't machines. This sort of clever loophole in the rules could be denied based on their own subjective views. However, it looked like the referee was okay with Fang Rui's cleverness and didn't interfere after 18 seconds. Boos started coming from the crowd, from Tyranny's fans. Tyranny's loyal fans were familiar with the rules. They started booing at the referee because they felt that the referee was being biased towards the home team. The referee ignored them because the boos were quickly suppressed by the applause. Tyranny's fans wouldn't be able to affect a referee's decision. This was Happy's home stadium. Fang Rui only switched postures. His goal hasn't changed. Isn't this violating the 18-second rule for sitting and waiting? Pan Lin called the referee's decision into question. The referee can make decisions based on his own discretion. First, the two characters are inside the manor, greatly reducing the search area and increasing the chances that Fang Rui's patience will pay off. Second, Song Qiying's river sunset is very close by. It's very likely that he'll walk into Fang Rui's range. My guess is that the referee acknowledged the increased success rate, so he judged that it was fair and didn't interfere. If Song Qiying chooses to break away from his current route, my guess is that the referee will probably interfere. Li Yibo was quite knowledgeable about the referee's thought process. I see, but from a certain perspective, by not interfering, isn't the referee leaking information to the player? Pan Lin said. Li Yibo stared blankly. When he looked at the match again, Boundless Sea was no longer crouching but standing up. Qi was gathering in his palms. However, he couldn't actually see any traces of river sunset, yet he was already preparing his ambush as if he knew river sunset was coming. Silly referee, his decision seemed very rational, based on the circumstances of the match, but Fang Rui exploited it. This master of playing dirty took advantage of the rules. Seeing that the referee didn't interfere, he judged that Song Qiying must be nearing his ambush location. Chapter 1494. Heroes come from the young. Chapter 1494. Heroes come from the young. Translator. Namyumi editor. Namyumi, what guts! Pan Lin cried out. The dirty style gave people a feeling of despicableness without any sense of heroism. Fang Rui crouching and waiting there was quite despicable, but exploiting the referee was extremely daring. He already had a yellow card, yet he still dared to challenge the referee. That's why he made a movement after 17 seconds, Li Yibo said. He was giving himself a buffer for the punishment. If he was punished because of this movement, he would only receive a warning and not a yellow card. But what if Song Qiying doesn't end up coming over? Then, would the referee directly give him a yellow card? Pan Lin asked. We'll know soon. Li Yibo was wise. Why would he guess when the answer would be known soon? On stage, a Qi gathered around the palms of Fang Rui's Boundless Sea, but this time, He wasn't charging a spirit reaches to the rainbow. With spirit reaches to the rainbow, he would crash into his opponent alongside the chi. He had been facing Zhang Jiao's Spitfire previously, so he was not afraid. But now he was facing a striker, the #1 close combat class. Throwing himself at the opponent was risky. It could turn into a situation similar to throwing a steamed bun at a hungry dog. Boundless Sea didn't have much health or mana. Fang Rui was extremely cautious. He didn't want to make any risky moves. As a result, he gathered chi in his palms and prepared to shoot a sky-piercing cannon. Fang Rui couldn't see Song Qiying's river sunset yet, but the viewers watching could see him. Sure enough, river sunset was making his way over step by step. Careful, Tyranny's fans couldn't help but be anxious. Even though Boundless Sea was an arrow at the end of its flight, a successful ambush could result in heavy injuries to River Sunset. One step at a time. Fang Rui's perspective was displayed on the big screen in the stadium. A small window showing Fang Rui's perspective could be seen in the broadcast as well. But at this moment, Song Qiying's line of sight suddenly shifted. His gaze was fixed on that hole in the ceiling. Tyranny's fans felt excited upon seeing this sight, while Happy's fans were feeling gloomy. Had Fang Rui been discovered? The fans on both sides sighed, but for different reasons. No, not yet, Li Yibo stated with certainty. Song Qiying is only aware that it's a possibility, Pan Lin shouted. How could the careful Song Qiying neglect such an important detail? Even though he didn't know that Fang Rui really was lying in wait there, he was completely prepared for the possibility of it. Chi Bullet. River Sunset sent out a probing attack. Chi Bullet was a low-level Chi master skill and could be used by all fighter classes. River Sunset had learned it, but it clearly hadn't been leveled very high. There didn't seem to be much Chi swirling inside the Chi Bullet. Even so, it shot accurately towards the hole in the ceiling and crashed into the edges of the hole. It didn't make much of a sound before dissipating. Boundless Sea didn't move. Fang Rui wasn't fooled by this probing attack. The chi gathered around Boundless Sea's hands didn't even tremble. The crowd erupted into cheers in praise of Fang Rui's calm. Not only had Song Qiying failed to scout out Fang Rui, this attack was equivalent to telling Fang Rui, "He's here, get ready." Pan Lin and Li Yibo sighed. A rookie was a rookie. Song Qiying was too naive. Running into someone as crafty as Fang Rui was truly a rookie's greatest misfortune. But soon afterwards, everyone was stunned. After Song Qiying's River Sunset fired a chi bullet at the ceiling and didn't discover anything, he turned around and left. He didn't keep going. Happy's fans weren't laughing, but Tyranny's fans weren't laughing either. Song Qiying probably wasn't sure, so he decided not to pursue it. But this sort of evasion was not a style that Tyranny's fans appreciated. Even if you had your suspicions, why not just keep probing? Why run away? They were too used to seeing the boldness of Han-Wenking striker. They weren't used to seeing Song Qiying's extreme caution. As a result, when they saw him avoid Fang Rui's ambush, they weren't too happy either. They weren't just looking forward to seeing the ambush fail. They were hoping to see their own player smash apart Fang Rui's ambush and let him know that traps and schemes were nothing but paper tigers. However, Song Qiying chose to retreat. Pan Lin and Li Yibo praised him for his caution and calm, but Tyranny's fans weren't feeling too pleased. River Sunset reached the door. It looked like he was about to push the door open to leave, but who would have expected him to do it in such a manner? He punched the door and sent it flying. What is he doing? Everyone was stunned. River Sunset went through the doorway. Then, after a few steps, he turned around and looked to be gauging the distance before making a sprint. River Sunset sprinted through the doorway and jumped. Running allowed his character to jump higher. River Sunset jumped onto the wall on the opposite side and pushed off it to jump again. At the same time, he swung his fist through the back fist. Its name said fist, but in reality it was a palm. River Sunset pushed his palm against the ceiling, letting out a muffled sound. But then, crack. River Sunset hit the ceiling, breaking it as if it were a dried-up branch. A hole appeared in the ceiling. River Sunset's head went through first. He quickly checked his surroundings and saw Boundless Sea hastily turning around and pushing out his palm. River Sunset's arms trembled. Reinforced iron bones to welcome the sky-piercing cannon. Chi thundered. Although River Sunset had super armor, he had no foothold, so there was no avoiding the knockback from the charged, sky-piercing cannon. 1,000-ton drop. River Sunset had shrunk into a ball after using the through-the-back fist, so he could get onto the second floor faster. He had made it through the hole, so he immediately used 1,000-ton drop. His 2 feet stepped onto the edges of the hole, using 1,000-ton drop to eliminate the knockback from sky-piercing cannon. But a new wave of chi from Boundless Sea had arrived. River Sunset jumped practically parallel to the floor, avoiding the attack. He rolled and got up. Boundless Sea sent out another palm, but with the super armor from reinforced iron bones, River Sunset didn't dodge. He tanked the damage and counterattacked. Boom! The crowd erupted. There were a few unhappy Tyranny fans before, but now their excitement had reached a peak so high that tears were about to come out. Yes, this was what they wanted to see. Tough and fierce, not sparing anything to destroy the opponent. They had completely misunderstood Song Qiang. This kid was no doubt a young hero of Tyranny. He was cautious and calm, but at the same time he hid the hot-blooded bravery to charge forward. He wasn't like what they had previously thought, a spineless coward who shrunk back at the slightest uncertainty. "Good job, little Song," Tyranny's fans shouted. Happy's fans quickly cheered on Happy, smothering Tyranny's shouts. But so what if Happy's fans had a numbers advantage? Would they shrink back? Of course not. Even though they weren't on the stage, they were supporters of Tyranny. If they didn't even have the energy to persevere, how could they ask the player on stage to roar? Tyranny's fans roared with all their might. The outcome of the fight was quickly decided. Fang Rui's Boundless Sea didn't have that much health left after all. Song Qiang won. Of course he won. There was no way he wouldn't win. However, the cheers from Tyranny's fans weren't just for the outcome, but more importantly, for how he did it. From Song Qiang, they could see the future for which they hoped. Fang Rui went out from the player booth, shaking his head. He didn't seem to be happy with the match. Even so, the audience still gave him applause. Beating Zhang Jiao and Lin Jingyan, chasing back Happy's lead, his performance was without fault. His ambush didn't succeed, but through Song Qiang's unyielding attitude, Fang Rui was able to take away 12% of River Sunset's health. This meant that Happy had a slight lead. Good job. Tyranny was praising their Song Qiang while Happy was praising their Fang Rui. As he walked back to his seat, his teammates praised his performance, but Fang Rui was unsatisfied. "That little brat playing with me like that," Fang Rui said. "It's fine, you take down some of his health too," Ye Xiu said. Fang Rui shook his head. "It was too far from my predictions." "How much were you thinking you could get him down to?" Chen Guo was curious. "Obviously until I got his severed head," Fang Rui said. Suddenly, everyone ignored him. "Did you think this was a 1v1 in the online game? With that little health and that little mana, you think you can beat a pro player in the playoffs who came in with full health and full mana? Even if Song Qiang was a rookie, it wasn't possible for him to be bullied to that extent." Next. Ye Xiu completely ignored Fang Rui, urging the next player to go onto the stage. Who was Happy's next player? Everyone had been guessing as soon as Fang Rui went down from the stage. If it wasn't Sima Cheng, it was Tang Ru. However, when they saw the name on the screen, everyone was surprised. Kaio Yifan, Ghostblade 1-inch Ash. "They're sending out Kaio Yifan," Pan Lin expressed his astonishment. Li Yibo thought about it. Feeling that his reasoning made sense, he replied, "Considering what has happened throughout this group arena, Sima Cheng wouldn't be a suitable player to pick." Pan Lin immediately understood. Sima Cheng was a launcher. Her greatest weapon was her long range. However, all of the fights so far had taken place in an enclosed space, which was very unfavorable for launchers. Happy had chosen this map for the group arena and knew this might happen. Was that why they hadn't sent Sima Cheng out for the group arena? Chapter 1495, Cautious Bravery. Chapter 1495, Cautious Bravery. Translator, Namiyami. Editor, Namiyami, Kaio Yifan vs. Song Qiying. This could be considered a battle between rookies, no? Pan Lin remarked as he watched Kaio Yifan walk onto the stage. Pretty much. Li Yibo nodded his head. Kaio Yifan was no longer an invisible nobody. As Happy moved towards the spotlight as a dark horse, he became recognized as one of their outstanding players. His past had been dug out long ago. Thus, people with certain amounts of authority in the scene like Zhuo Chenrui, who disliked Tiny Herb, often used Kaio Yifan as an example to criticize Tiny Herb for being so blind as to letting go of an incredible talent. Kaio Yifan's plays had caught the attention of many. Some even felt sorry for him. This was his first time standing on the professional stage, but because he had been registered with Tiny Herb previously, he could not be considered as a first-year rookie and could not contend for the best rookie title. If not, people like to talk about what-ifs. Kaio Yifan himself never cared about these what-ifs though. He was extremely happy with his place in the team. He had switched classes to a phantom demon, but he had ample opportunities to go onto the stage. He was often given opportunities even in the 1v1 competitions, which weren't too suitable for phantom demons. This feeling of being valued was something he had never experienced before at Tiny Herb. He had received quite the attention. Several teams had even privately contacted him, attempting to recruit him. Kaio Yifan refused all of them without any hesitation. No team or promises could move him because he would always remember, in his time of greatest need, who the person who had extended a hand to him was. Kaio Yifan didn't have any resentment towards being ignored, but he attached great importance to being valued. He hoped that he could stay with Happy to realize his dreams. The problem was that his dreams were being realized too fast. Because of Kaio Yifan's past experiences, he didn't have high aspirations and was extremely cautious. His initial thoughts were to start over with Happy and become a pro player, one small step at a time. Yes, his initial goal had been set very low. He didn't want to give up glory and he wanted to continue being a pro player, that was it. But now he stood on the playoff stage and his team had even smoothly made it past the first round. His dreams were coming about too fast to the extent that he was caught unprepared. What was his new goal now? Champion. Was it really not a joke? When reality hit him, Kaio Yifan had truly felt a bit dizzy. The seniors at Happy had kept on blabbering about being the champions, but Kaio Yifan always just felt like they were just trying to encourage the team, even if this sort of encouragement was ridiculous. But were the seniors at Happy really the type to keep repeating the same joke? It turns out that it wasn't a joke. It turns out that I just didn't have enough confidence in myself. It turns out that we really do have the ability to fight for the championship trophy. As the playoffs grew nearer and nearer, Kaio Yifan adjusted his frame of mind. Because he realized that Happy truly did intend on walking the difficult path to become the champions. Apart from feeling bewildered, he also felt excited. I need to work even harder, so I don't become a burden to the team in our path to become the champions. He kept on reminding himself these words. And now he was about to stand on the stage alone to pave the way to Happy's victory. Kaio Yifan took in a deep breath. He walked onto the stage and couldn't help but look back towards his team. His captain, Ye Xiu, had his arm raised, giving him a big thumbs up. "You're far better than you think you are." Ye Xiu had said these words to him before he went up. This wasn't the first time Ye Xiu had said these words to him. The way Ye Xiu said it would always fill Kaio Yifan with energy and confidence. He couldn't let down his seniors or the team's hopes. Caio Yifen turned back and went into the player booth. He swiped his card and his character loaded into the map. The opening was the same as all the other ones. The two characters headed towards the manor, one towards the front, one towards the back. Song Qiying chose the exact same route as the previous fight, which made his scouting much more efficient, quickly filtering through room after room. Caio Yifen went in through the front door of the manor. He didn't make any unexpected moves and started moving through room after room too. 1-inch Ash moved much faster than Song Qiying's River Sunset, though. It seemed that he had a target location that he wanted to reach as fast as possible. After going through the front door of the manor, 1-inch Ash entered the main lobby. Past that, there were numerous hallways interspersed with rooms, 17 in total, serving various purposes. Caio Yifen's 1-inch Ash went past 2 hallways and 4 rooms. When he reached a spot that he was satisfied with, 1-inch Ash stopped. Then he slashed apart the door that he had just went through. Then the door in front and on the right, all 3 doors in the room were cut apart by 1-inch Ash. Afterwards, he leaned against the wall, his sword raised. "Is he waiting?" Pan Lin asked. Li Yibo frowned. It could be considered as waiting, but it was a bit different from how it was usually done. By cutting down those doors, Caio Yifen was giving himself away, especially since the rooms in the manor weren't cut off from each other. Song Qiying, who was scouting around, clearly heard the noise, and 3 times at that. Caio Yifen was lying in wait, but it gave off the smell of bait. Wasn't the bait too obvious? With Song Qiying's cautious nature, he wouldn't rashly charge towards that area. Song Qiying wouldn't be rash, but he wouldn't ignore it either. Shrinking back and cowering wasn't Team Tyranny's style. River Sunset headed towards there. Boom! River Sunset also broke apart the doors as he rushed into the room to the right of 1-inch Ash's room. The splintered wood from the door flew everywhere as Song Qiying observed his surroundings, quickly getting a picture of the room's interior. He didn't see anyone, but he could see the door that had been cut apart. His gaze immediately shifted towards that room. Caio Yifen's 1-inch Ash was quietly moving towards that door, but after a few steps he stopped moving. He had his sword raised in front of him, ready to attack at any moment. The sword's name was Snow Stripe, a streak of white hidden amidst a dark purple light. River Sunset's footsteps slowed the closer he got. When he was almost at the door, his footsteps had practically stopped. The 2 players were clearly young rookies, but in this match, they seemed to have the caution of old generals. The tension in the crowd could almost be felt. This situation, where the 2 sides were separated by just 1 wall, had taken place before in the fight between Ye Xiu and Zhang Jiao. It was just that this time, the door was already destroyed. The 2 sides were just 1 step apart from seeing each other. 1-inch Ash raised his Takai, Snow Stripe, slightly. He could already feel that Song Qiying's River Sunset was right in front of the door. Light started to swirl around his blade. The contrast between the light and that streak of white appeared even more distinct. 1-inch Ash started casting, preparing to set down a ghost boundary. As for River Sunset, he seemed to hesitate when he reached the door and then suddenly retreated. The audience couldn't understand. But because of the previous round, Tyranny's fans weren't going to question Song Qiying anymore. They believed that Song Qiying was a true Tyranny hero. No matter what move he made, they wouldn't think it was because he was timid. Tyranny's heroes never cowered. He retreated 2 steps and then moved horizontally, swinging his fists. Pi! His fist smashed into the wall. Everyone cried out in surprise. They thought that a repeat of the match between Fang Rui and Zhang Jiao would happen again, the wall breaking with a single punch. The camera zoomed in onto the wall. A bit of the wallpaper could be seen coming off. As for the wall itself, not even a tremble. Immediately afterwards, a second punch came out. Punch after punch. River Sunset kept on punching the wall. These were all normal attacks which didn't consume mana. But at the same time, the attack power was pitifully low. Trying to breaking through the wall like this would require who knew how many punches. But Song Qiang didn't care. He just kept on punching. After several punches, he moved to a different position and then continued his barrage. People were beginning to see his intent. Hadn't Caio Yifen broken down the 3 doors? Now Song Qiang wanted to bring down the entire wall. It was quite a bold idea, but the execution was a bit brutish, just using normal attacks to punch the wall until it broke. The 2 sides were only separated by this wall. How could Caio Yifen not hear what was going on? Song Qiang didn't care though. He had made his decision and he would go through with it. The ghost magic swirling around 1-inch Ash's Takai, snow stripe, gradually dimmed. Pa, 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 pa. He could hear the sound of the punches hitting the wall. Caio Yifen quickly realized Song Qiang's intentions. For a moment, he was in a daze. The other side unexpectedly wanted to break down the wall. This sort of cautious yet bold move was completely outside of Caio Yifen's expectations. Should I go around or should I stay and wait? There were only 2 choices. 1-inch Ash leaned against the wall, feeling the tremors from the punches. Stay. Caio Yifen made his decision. Even if his opponent dispelled this trap with such a brutish method, Caio Yifen felt like waiting would still be advantageous to him. Happy's players knew how much damage the walls could take because this was the map that they had chosen. They had a certain level of understanding of their opponents. They had a rough idea of Song Qiang's attack power. In that case, how many punches would it take for River Sunset to break down this wall? It was better to have a conservative estimate. That way he could make plans beforehand. If it was necessary, he could finish off the wall himself and take the initiative. 1-inch Ash stopped leaning against the wall. He retreated back a few steps, his sword directed towards the wall. I'll wait. I'll decide the winner of this fight here. Everyone could see his plans. Pa, 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 the sound of punches hitting a wall echoed throughout the stadium. Chapter 1496, Fighting Blind. Chapter 1496, Fighting Blind. Translator, Namyami. Editor, Namyami. How many punches? Not many people had the patience to count, but Song Qiang did. 164. River Sunset had punched the wall 164 times so far. Facing normal attacks, this wall appeared extremely sturdy. But after 164 punches, the wall was filled with cracks. Many parts of the wall weren't flat anymore. Song Qiang drew in a deep breath of air. Almost. He didn't know how sturdy the wall was exactly, but just based on the fights today, their vice-captain Zhang Xinji was able to figure out a rough estimate. Walls had a health value. Although it was an estimated range, if it came from Zhang Xinji, then it must be accurate. 165, 166, 167. After 3 punches, River Sunset temporarily stopped. The next punches would enter within that range. Song Qiang had no plans of testing what the exact value was 1 punch at a time. He planned on using a powerful attack to break apart the wall in 1 strike. He didn't know whether Happy's Caio Yifen was still on the other side of the wall, but if he was, he would be ready. He pretended that Caio Yifen was there, waiting for him with a field of ghost formations. He had used around 160 punches to weaken the wall, even though he didn't know if the opponent was even on the other side. This method was a bit crude, but it was effective. This way, he didn't need to worry about falling into a trap. Song Qiang knew what class his opponent was. Phantom demons could completely fill the room with ghost boundaries, which was clearly why Caio Yifen had chosen this room to begin with. Several fights had already taken place in this manner. How could Tyranny not have a good grasp of it by now? Then the final hit. He could attack as he moved past the wall. Song Qiang drew in a deep breath of air. Attack, Ferocious Tiger Flurry. He decided on the level 70 skill Ferocious Tiger Flurry. In an instant, countless punches landed on the wall. In an instant, the wall crumbled. In an instant, River Sunset charged through. After breaking through the wall, Song Qiang could see 1-inch Ash standing on the other side with his sword held in front of him. Ghost boundary. With one glance, Song Qiang confirmed 1-inch Ash's position. With a second glance, he confirmed that there were no ghost boundaries nearby. None. Even if there were ghost boundaries, Song Qiang's river sunset would charge forward anyways, but he felt that it was strange not seeing any. However, once a young hero of tyranny made his decision, there was no retreating. Ferocious tiger flurry didn't stop. River sunset continued to charge forward, stepping on the broken ruins. Everyone's eyes went wide at this scene, but their eyes weren't on River Sunset. Even the camera wasn't focused on this ferocious character. The camera was focused on the ceiling above him. Right when River Sunset broke apart the wall and rushed forward, the ceiling suddenly began to fall. The viewers had known about this possibility. They had been observing Caio Yifen's 1-inch Ash through their omniscient view. But at this moment, someone suddenly let out a cry. The ceiling was much less sturdy than the wall. While Sunset River had been punching the wall, Caio Yifen's 1-inch Ash had jumped, leaving 3 deep cuts in the ceiling. As a result, when the wall collapsed, the ceiling, which had been on the verge of collapse, lost its final support. The wall crumbled, the ceiling collapsed. But the noise sounded the same, so Song Qiang hadn't noticed this point. He didn't realize it until he saw that a shadow in front of him was getting larger and larger. Song Qiang immediately figured out what had happened. Ferocious tiger flurry. River Sunset continued to attack, breaking apart the falling ceiling. Yes, Tyranny's fans cheered, seeing Song Qiang's fierceness. But at this moment, 1-inch Ash's snow stripe flashed with light, and a ghost boundary formed. Caio Yifen had probably deduced that Song Qiang's River Sunset could break apart the falling ceiling, but he didn't place down a ghost boundary ahead of time. Because a ghost boundary wasn't a wall, it wasn't something that could not be entered. Song Qiang's aggression showed that even if he had placed down a ghost boundary, he definitely would have entered anyways. If he had revealed the ghost boundary ahead of time, he would have let his opponent know when to advance and when to retreat, which would not have been good. As a result, Caio Yifen did not show his hand ahead of time. He waited until the battle began, and acted when his opponent had nowhere to run to. This was the air of a pro player. It was the biggest difference between a pro player and a normal player. Having the ceiling collapse was to scatter Song Qiang's attention and make it so that he could not move. Song Qiang's method was simple and direct. Caio Yifen was not polite. He carefully set up a trap to face this simple and direct method. Indeed, not many people had thought of breaking the ceiling. Dark boundary. 1-inch Ash started with a dark boundary which inflicted blind onto enemies. After breaking free from the ceiling, River Sunset had lost the opportunity to interrupt the cast. The ghost boundary fell. Apart from hastily getting out of its range, there was nothing he could do. Charge. River Sunset continued to charge, but after 2 steps, he had lost his sight because of the dark boundary. Song Qiang's screen was black, but he didn't stop because of that. River Sunset continued forward, throwing a punch towards where he remembered 1-inch Ash being. Collapsing fist. A loud whistle accompanied the fist, but how could Caio Yifen not be able to dodge a punch that the opponent had blindly threw out? 1-inch Ash had quietly taken a step back a while ago. Caio Yifen was no longer in the position that Song Qiang remembered. He only knew that his punch had missed. Where was 1-inch Ash? Left, right, behind to the left, behind to the right. Without any hesitation, River Sunset punched again. He stepped forward, double tiger palm. Ah, the audience cried out. Song Qiang's screen was pitch black, but his step forward and his double tiger palm made it seem like he knew exactly where 1-inch Ash was. His positioning and his attack were completely on point. The 2 palms covered a wide area. 1-inch Ash could not dodge to the left nor the right. His only choice was to keep retreating backwards. Pa! The 2 palms missed their target. Just the force of the strike alone was able to produce a clear sound. Neither attack hit, but these two attacks had been let out while blind. If a normal player were blinded by dark boundary, they would fall into a disadvantaged state. However, Song Qiying's River Sunset continued pushing forward, forcing Caio Yifan into defensive position. Caio Yifan felt a bit annoyed. He regretted not moving far away enough in the beginning and escaping cleanly from Song Qiying. Song Qiying had guessed his position correctly both times. The first time was from memory. The second time, it was probably only because he wanted to continue pushing forward. In the darkness, there was no way to know which way was out, so Tyranny's players would always choose to move forward. Caio Yifan should have considered this point from the beginning. Even if he hadn't escaped cleanly at the start, he shouldn't have retreated backwards. Retreating was the same as cooperating with Tyranny's fondness for advancing. The double tiger palm had forced Caio Yifan to retreat backwards, but with this retreat, he was finally able to launch a counterattack. Even though he knew this counterattack would reveal his position, if he continued to let Song Qiying pressure him, not only would he be wasting his dark boundary, it was likely that Song Qiying would seize the initiative from him despite being blinded. Moonlight slash. Sword light flashed alongside the sound of the wind. Song Qiying couldn't see, but he could hear. It was the sound of a slash. 1-inch Ash was a phantom demon. He only had 3 low-level slash skills in his kit. Ghost slash, moonlight slash, full moonlight slash. 3 skills. His opponent was directly in front of him. What angle would he attack from? Song Qiying instantly made these deductions. River Sunset leaned to the side. The audience cried out in surprise. River Sunset had actually dodged this moonlight slash. He was able to dodge it despite not being able to see. Whirlwind kick. River Sunset jumped, his legs sweeping through the air towards 1-inch Ash. Not only did he dodge the attack, he was able to counterattack too. The audience didn't know what to say. Hit. 1-inch Ash was unable to dodge and could only take the blow. He raised his Takai in front of him and hastily used the Blade Master's Guard to reduce the damage. 1-inch Ash was kicked back. Right when River Sunset touched the ground, he jumped up again. Soaring Tiger. River Sunset jumped, chasing after 1-inch Ash. It looked as if he wasn't blind at all. Again and again, the audience couldn't help but cry out in surprise, let alone the 2 commentators. Song Qiying played brilliantly, but Caio Yifan didn't let his spirits drop. 1-inch Ash put himself in a steady position, ready to counterattack at any moment because this attack should not hit. It missed. Just as Caio Yifan expected, the Soaring Tiger missed. Song Qiying's timing and thought process were precise and accurate, but if he couldn't see, he couldn't see. When Caio Yifan put his guard, Song Qiying wasn't able to notice his slight change in position from just the feel of his attack connecting. As a result, there was a slight error in his judgment. Song Qiying was calm, but his opponent didn't panic and stayed calm despite the cheers and shouts from the crowd. In the end, Caio Yifan was able to make use of the blind on Song Qiying. He didn't waste this dark boundary. Full moonlight slash. He attacked the airborne River Sunset, striking him in the back and sending him flying towards a corner in the room. The phantom ghost's power residing in his blade began to flicker. Ice Soul, Ice Boundary, and then Ash Boundary, and then Plague Boundary. Caio Yifan calmly began his offense. Chapter 1497, The 10-Year Captain. Chapter 1497, The 10-Year Captain. Translator, Namyami Editor, Namyami Glory. The large word flashed across the screen. No matter the process, the match would progress toward only one conclusion: victory and defeat. In this round, victory belonged to Happy's Caio Yifan. Thunderous applause instantly rose up within Xiaoshan Stadium. Filled with regret, Song Qiying walked out of the competitor booth. The stadium full of applause wasn't for him, but he didn't lower his head. The opponent had played excellently, but he hadn't had any embarrassing moments himself. Perhaps from the beginning, his thinking hadn't been meticulous enough. Even as Song Qiang walked off stage, he was already reviewing his own performance. Again and again, his mind replayed the scene of the ceiling collapsing and River Sunset losing his chance. If it had been the vice-captain, he definitely wouldn't have overlooked this point. Song Qiang looked at one particular person sitting in Tyranny's player area. He was a striker, the one in Tyranny who would inherit Desert Dust after Han Wenking's retirement. The team had never hidden this point. Tyranny was just this kind of open and direct team from top to bottom. Song Qiang wouldn't refuse this kind of arrangement, and he was proud of this, but he wouldn't hide his own views. Even though he very much liked his striker class in terms of player personality, he more greatly appreciated that of Tyranny's vice-captain, Zhang Xinji. Cautious, thorough, flawless. In many people's eyes, perhaps this sort of steady style wasn't thrilling enough. But Song Qiang felt that this was very cool. Maybe it was just because of his natural personality. Tyranny didn't make any specific demands of him, nor had he purposely tried to imitate Zhang Xinji's style. But even as he followed and developed the style that he personally liked, everyone in Tyranny looked at him like a little Zhang Xinji. Song Qiang didn't object. He hadn't purposely tried to mimic it. This was just the style that belonged to him. But it still wasn't enough. Song Qiang reviewed the match, searching for where he hadn't been good enough. And at this moment, Tyranny's group arena anchor had already stood up. Han Wenking. It could only be Han Wenking. It had to be Han Wenking. He could step back when appropriate, but if he didn't appear in the group arena in this crucial playoffs match, then Tyranny's fans would definitely be disappointed, and Tyranny's players might also be very uneasy. 10-year captain, 10-year pillar. In terms of the influence had over the team, Han Wenking was absolutely the number one. Even his long enemy Ye Xiu had met an unhappy end at the hands of Excellent Era. Among the later players, Wang Jixi came the closest. The influence he had at Tiny Herb was similarly significant, but compared to Han Wenking, he was still just a bit lacking. Han Wenking used his personal spirit and charisma to affect the whole team. Tyranny's style today was because their captain and core from the very beginning was a player with this kind of style, and it continued within this team to this day. But what about Wang Jixi and Tiny Herb? He had changed his own style, assimilated into the team, and ultimately they had won 2 championships together. In terms of results, his 2 championships beat out Han Wenking's 1, but in terms of influence on the team, he clearly couldn't compete with Han Wenking. And now, this 10-year captain stood up from his seat. Like so many times before, he was ready to defend that most crucial point for Tyranny. The Tyranny fans who had traveled far to come here began to roar as though they had suddenly ignited. In the face of the hopes of his fans, Han Wenking didn't play humble. To the away team fans, he extended a fist. The roars grew louder. At this time, Song Qiang had walked off the stage and arrived in front of Han Wenking. Han Wenking's fist lowered and pointed toward him. Song Qiang immediately reciprocated, extending his arm toward him as well. Fist bump. "Good luck, Captain," Song Qiang shouted. Han Wenking nodded and strode toward the stage. Tyranny was currently at a disadvantage. Kaio Yifan had used 61% of his health to defeat Song Qiang, leaving him with 39% right now. This advantage was relatively significant, but now as Han Wenking walked on stage, there wasn't a hint of worry in the eyes of those dedicated Tyranny fans. There was only resolve. A match always ended in victory or defeat. Everyone understood this. But what was revealed in the eyes of the Tyranny's fans wasn't belief in a surefire victory or anything. Han Wenking brought them a steady confidence. They believed that, as long as he was here, then even if they lost, they wouldn't lose that fighting spirit or confidence. As long as he was here, they would only lose people but not their determination. Tyranny had never been a team that feared failure. In the early days of the alliance, they had been eliminated by Excellent Era 3 times. Excellent Era and Ye Xiu had been called their weakness, their perfect counter. But so what? In the Season 4 finals, on the highest stage of glory, they ferociously defeated Excellent Era and proved themselves. The older Tyranny fans would never forget that day. That day had been the most beautiful demonstration of Tyranny's strength of character, unafraid of failure, always scaling new heights. Under this man's leadership, Tyranny had walked these 10 years. Now, the tyranny that he led once again advanced toward that highest peak, and he once again stood on stage. In the televised broadcast, Pan Lin was currently describing all of this in the most poetic way possible. His partner Li Yibo had come from tyranny and experienced that era, and even if he could no longer see all the strategies clearly, he would never forget tyranny's spirit. Because he was also a member of tyranny, someone who had gone wild with all of them during that season. Hearing Pan Lin's passionate description, Li Yibo too felt his heart racing. He even had the urge to rush on stage, grip that mouse and keyboard once more and battle. All right, the battle's about to begin. Tyranny's captain of 10 years, Han Wenqing, against Happy's rookie Caio Yifan, said Pan Lin. Even though Caio Yifan had registered as a pro in Season 8, he had only appeared in official matches starting from this season, so when talking about him, he was still called a rookie. The opening didn't change. They still charged toward the manor at the center of the map. Han Wenqing's fierce bravery and decisiveness could be seen just from the way he moved his character. Desert Dust's path was completely straight as he charged forward. In front of and behind the manor, the same rhythm. Caio Yifan, like before, controlled 1-inch Ash to take the front door, and then he quickly arrived at the location of the previous battle. Caio Yifan still wants to fight here, Pan Lin said. After watching the previous match, everyone very much understood how advantageous this whole area was for a ghost blade. The room size, the arrangement of the surrounding rooms, it had all been thoroughly used by 1-inch Ash. What was a home field advantage? This was it, using the map to the maximum extent. Watching from off-stage, Tyranny's players, including Han Wenqing, all recognized this level of skill. But right now, Caio Yifan still wanted to make this the battlefield. Wasn't that too wishful thinking? After seeing how well he'd used this area, would Han Wenqing simply go along with his desires and fight him here? Han Wenqing. Doubt, after encountering this name, caused the logic to grind to a halt. It seemed like an illogical move, but if Han Wenqing did it, it suddenly felt more acceptable. Because he was always like this. Even if he knew there was a tiger in the mountain, he would still head toward the mountain with the tiger. For anyone else, it would be an illogical move, but he could flip the situation in one burst of determination. Caio Yifan once again opened the battle here. A typical opponent probably wouldn't come, but Han Wenqing might actually just burst in. Maybe Caio Yifan had anticipated this opponent's personality to make this kind of wishful plan. And so, everyone looked at Han Wenqing's side. Desert Dust had entered the manor from the back, and he made a clean sweep of the area. He would arrive here shortly. This time, Caio Yifan didn't need to split any doors, so there wasn't any sound to notify Han Wenqing. 1-inch Ash just set up his ambush in this room, making his preparations for battle. Because a wall had collapsed, the two rooms were now connected and seemed much more spacious than before. Caio Yifan wasn't sure from which end Han Wenqing's Desert Dust would charge in, so he hid 1-inch Ash in a corner and prepared ambushes for the various possible angles. He didn't have to wait too long before he heard footsteps. The sound of moving footsteps wasn't hidden at all. Whatever was stepped upon made a sound, closer and closer. Pa! Suddenly, there was another sound, and 1-inch Ash pressed against a wall felt a tremor. There was no way that Caio Yifan couldn't recognize this sound. Just last battle, Song Qiying controlled his character and made this sound over 160 times. Han Wenking's desert dust was also hitting the wall. Just as Caio Yifan reached this realization, the second punch already resounded. Caio Yifan had already roughly judged where the sound had come from. As he looked over, he heard a boom, and the wall he turned to look at now had a hole in it. 3 punches to make a hole. This, of course, wasn't because desert dust's attack power was so unbelievable, but because the wall he was punching was already fairly weakened. There had been so many battles back and forth, all occurring within the manor and most on the first floor. The room furnishings had already become so wrecked that there wasn't much more to wreck, and the walls had also suffered much damage during this process. Han Wenking evidently had found a particularly weak point and broke through in only 3 punches. Was he working out his anger? At the beginning, this was what everyone had thought. But very soon, they saw desert dust and 1-inch ash meet eyes through the hole. Seeing 1-inch ash's position, Han Wenking, of course, immediately understood his line of thinking. Would he just boldly go forward and fight with Caio Yifan in an area where the ghost blade was most comfortable? The snow stripe in 1-inch ash's hands was already beginning to flicker with light. But desert dust, after meeting 1-inch ash's eyes through that hole, actually walked past. Another number of punches, and another hole was opened in the weakened wall. And then change position hit again. The sounds came wave after wave, progressing around in a circle. Caio Yifan listened, and gradually he paled. Song Qiying had only wanted to tear down a wall. Was Han Wenking preparing to tear down this entire manor? Chapter 1498 Dismantle. Chapter 1498 Dismantle. Translator. Namiyami. Editor. Namiyami, what's Han Wenking trying to do? The audience had a clear view of desert dust's actions, and they weren't so dumb that they couldn't figure out his intentions. This question was a rhetorical one, expressing their surprise. Even Pan Lin was wondering too in the live broadcast. Boom, boom, boom. Weak spots in the wall were blasted apart, and soon enough, the 2 walls were full of holes. Was the manor trembling? A constant rumble could be heard now, and Caio Yifan wasn't sure if he was imagining it, but it felt like the walls themselves were moving, unable to support the weight. The ceiling seemed to be sinking bit by bit, as it had lost its support. If this continued, the manor really would collapse. Caio Yifan didn't care if it was just his imagination or not. He made a resolute decision. He couldn't lie here and wait any longer. Tyranny's old striker was much more ruthless than their new striker. Caio Yifan had no choice but to act. He was extremely familiar with the structure of this room. Han Wenking's desert dust was destroying the wall in this area, using the sound of the attacks to locate an enemy's position. With an approximation of desert dust's location, Caio Yifan had 1-inch ash rush over. Because he was familiar with the area, he predicted the area of the wall desert dust was going to hit next and decided to lie in wait there. Crouching, 1-inch ash successfully arrived at the base of the wall, carefully poised for action as Caio Yifan listened carefully to the sounds. The sounds got closer and closer, and dust began falling from the ceiling above. Caio Yifan raised his character's view to look. This time he was certain the ceiling really was trembling, unable to properly support its own weight. Caio Yifan stayed motionless. Desert dust was near. If he moved, he'd expose himself. Thwack, thwack. 2 punches, clear, solid hits. The sound didn't just come from the air, but the wall itself. Desert dust had finally struck at the wall 1-inch ash was concealed near. Boom! The 3rd punch went through the wall. 1-inch ash remained motionless against the wall. He could see desert dust's fist retracting back through the wall from his angle. Thwack, thwack, thwack. He was still hitting this wall. Han Wenking was aiming to find weak spots in the wall. The walls he had punched through hadn't completely collapsed yet, but once he punched out areas all across the wall, it was clearly unable to take much more. Boom! Another hole was punched into the wall, practically right next to 1-inch Ash. Caio Yifan could even see the outline of Desert Dust's knuckles within his famous silver weapon, the gauntlet's flame fist. The color of fire, Caio Yifan could practically feel the heat radiating off of his fist, the blaze of battle lust and determination. Thwack! Another punch and Desert Dust broke through the wall a third time. It wasn't at where 1-inch Ash was hiding. Caio Yifan had a clear, precise judgment, and would naturally choose a place where the wall was sturdy, a place Han Wenking wouldn't choose. The strike sounded next to him, and 1-inch Ash slowly unsheathed his sword, wisps of light surfacing around him. Boom! Another hole appeared. Caio Yifan didn't move, his view locked forwards towards the doorway Desert Dust was approaching. That was when the wall behind him started to quake harshly and began to bend. No way! Caio Yifan raised his head. Areas of the ceiling above were already starting to collapse. Had it reached its limit? The answer was yes, and Han Wenking knew it as well. Thwack! Another punch struck the wall. This time he was no longer picking weak spots, just hitting the wall, using attacks to cause it to quake and bend further. He was trying to hasten the collapse. Just one punch and that half of the wall caved in. This punch was no longer a normal attack, but a more powerful skill in order to accelerate the manor's destruction. With the state the manor was in, it caused massive damage. With this half of the wall collapsed, 1-inch Ash was exposed, and the room reached its limits. Without needing for Desert Dust's further help, the ceiling crumbled with a thunderous rumble. Caio Yifan hastily tried to get 1-inch Ash out of the way, but Desert Dust lunged forth, right under the collapsing ceiling. Boom! The ceiling smashed against the floor, sending dust everywhere. With one last roll, Desert Dust left the fallen ceiling behind him using his low position. When he jumped up, he threw a fist, meeting 1-inch Ash's blade head-on. Collapsing fist. The Ghost Blade slash skills had nothing on the priority of a striker's punch. This punch sent 1-inch Ash flying, blade and all. There was no pause in his steps as he flew into pursuit. The walls were collapsing, the ceiling was falling, but Han Wenking ignored it all. Desert Dust charged amidst the tremors. Crash, crash, crash. The sound of rubble falling erupted all around, sending dust flying, devouring their surroundings. Two silhouettes fought in this catastrophic scene. The entire area all around them had collapsed. Even the areas that Desert Dust hadn't struck were brought down by neighboring areas like dominoes, having weakened from the battle prior. Ruins, ruins everywhere. The walls collapsed, the ceiling fell, the second-floor structures and even walls fell with it. The audience had long since forgotten about the battle occurring between the two, just watching the ancient manor and wondering if the entire thing would just go down. It didn't. In the end, it didn't. From the outside, the manor didn't seem like it had changed at all, but the interior had been completely overturned. The second floor, after a chain of reactions, no longer existed. The first floor was just rubble from the second floor, having turned into ruins. Boom! With a thunderous bang, the ruins exploded and a character was thrown out. Who was it? Everyone's gazes followed the figure. 1-inch Ash. It was Caio Yifan's 1-inch Ash. Soon enough, Han Wenking's Desert Dust appeared as well. He ignored everything happening around them, and all that existed in his eyes was the target he had to fell. One last punch, the final blow. Glory. The system announced Desert Dust victory with the catastrophic scene playing background, the ruins, some areas still falling, crumbling. The audience didn't know what to say anymore. A map advantage. Han Wenking had demolished it. That was pretty wild. The happy fans in the venue were all silent while the guest fans from Tyranny roared and cheered. What style! What a Tyranny victory! Demolished the map with the enemy, destroyed it all, spectacular. Caio Yifan walked out of the player booth amidst the cacophony. The crazed Tyranny fans naturally weren't very friendly to him. Last round, he had song keying completely suppressed. And this round, Han Wenking had given the Tyranny fans a victory to feel good about, one that gave them the satisfaction of revenge. Nothing was more satisfying. The Tyranny fans couldn't be more excited, almost seeming to forget that this wasn't over yet. There was still one more member for Happy. Thus, amidst their excitement, the big screen silently displayed Happy's fifth player, announcing the identity of their anchor. Wei Chen, Warlock Windward Formation. It's Wei Chen. Pan Lin's shout was one full of surprise. This really was a completely unexpected arrangement. Wei Chen, Blue Rain's ex-captain Wei Chen. In the first team competition against Blue Rain, he used his determination to help Happy build the foundations of their strategy. He had struggled to the bitter end, but this was exactly why he was deserving of respect. Everyone could tell that this player still had his awareness and judgment, but his reaction and mechanics couldn't keep up anymore. Wei Chen wasn't fighting Blue Rain, he was fighting the cruel passing of time. His performance last time was practically miraculous. Perhaps it was because they had a home field advantage or he was familiar with Blue Rain's strategy, that Wei Chen could perform well enough to rival his youth. When the match against Blue Rain ended, everyone thought that was where his contribution ended. He was their ace against Blue Rain. However now, against Tyranny in the first match, the group arena, Wei Chen was the anchor. How surprising, but Wei Chen was already getting up, waving at the fans energetically as he walked towards the stage. He met Caio Yifan halfway. "You must have been scared," Wei Chen grinned at Caio Yifan. Caio Yifan paused, unsure how to react. What did that mean? How was he meant to reply to that? "Watch and learn, youngster," Wei Chen ruffled Caio Yifan's hair. After he completely messed up the other's hairstyle, he headed for the stage satisfied. Happy's last player is Wei Chen. "What is this about?" Pan Lin asked Li Yibo. "Probably Wei Chen has a great grasp over this map," Li Yibo answered weakly. His random guess had actually hit the mark. Wei Chen had thought that his playoffs journey would be done at Blue Rain, but when Happy ended up choosing this map for their fight against Tyranny, Wei Chen realized there might be more in store for him. He was very familiar with this map, and even more familiar with the manor in the middle of this map. Indoors battles wouldn't be able to get fast either due to the switches in small scenes. For a slower-paced veteran like him, it was a match made in heaven. He could fight on this map. When Wei Chen volunteered, he saw Ye Xiu gazing at him. He didn't need to speak to get the idea across, and so Wei Chen got another chance. However, now, Wei Chen gave a self-mocking smile. The one thing he was depending on had been obliterated by Han Wenqing. While sitting off stage, he had already cursed Han Wenqing to hell and back over 180 times. Happy's group arena was all up to him, yet he had lost his one advantage: fighting Han Wenqing head-on. Wei Chen's heart was trembling. How could the current him take on that raging tiger? Though that tiger had grown old, he was practically old enough to be buried, yet he still crawled out to struggle this one last time. They had gotten to this point, yet the universe was still making things hard for him. Wei Chen couldn't help but grumble under his breath until the referee waved at him to hurry. "Then let's do this." Wei Chen gritted his teeth and entered the player booth. Han Wenqing. "Let me experience your fearsome, tiger-like determination again after all these years." Chapter 1499. A Ruined Map. Chapter 1499. A Ruined Map. Translator. Namyami Editor. Namyami Group Arena. Final Round. Although Han Wenqing was able to cleanly take down Caio Yifan last round, it wasn't possible for his Desert Dust not to have taken any damage under those circumstances. His Desert Dust had 81% health left. Wei Chen's Windward Formation was in high spirits, but with that small of a lead, how could anyone favor this old general? Let alone Tyranny or neutral fans, even the Happy fans felt uneasy. Some had trouble understanding Happy's arrangements for the group arena. Happy had sent a phantom demon, who wasn't suited for 1v1s, as their fourth player. Their fifth player was Wei Chen. Didn't that mean Happy hadn't planned on placing a fierce hero as the final checkpoint? Or could it be that their third player Fang Rui was supposed to be their great general? Had their intention be to end the group arena in a 3v5? But none of these possibilities were logical. Pan Lin and Li Yibo discussed this issue as the round officially began. How would Wei Chen face this deciding round? Everyone was curious about Wei Chen. Then they saw Wei Chen act. His character hadn't moved yet, but the trash talking had started. "I say, little Han, how outrageous. How could you tear apart the map like this?" Wei Chen typed. Little Han, a cold chill could be felt in the air. In terms of careers, both of them had started in Season 1. Neither was more senior than the other in that sense. But in terms of age, Wei Chen's words held true. The problem was Han Wenking, little Han. It didn't feel right. Addressing him like that gave a sense of amiability and care. It didn't fit this captain of tyranny at all. How would Han Wenking respond? Everyone's attention shifted to the player chat. Han Wenking didn't reply. It seemed like he didn't want to bother with such uncouth trash talking. Desert Dust rushed forward. Wei Chen's windward formation was on his way over too, but his movement seemed so sluggish. It was completely different from Desert Dust's lofty advance. Is there even a point in playing out this round? Countless people felt that victory had already been decided just from the energy of the players. Soon the players reached the manor. The inside had torn apart into ruins, but the outside looked pristine. The front door and rear door were still intact. Han Wenking's Desert Dust went through the rear door and marched through the broken ruins in front of him. Because of the destruction, he could see much more inside the manor compared to before. Even so, Han Wenking didn't find any traces of windward formation. He didn't take the middle road. Han Wenking thought about what his opponent might do. The home team advantage for this map came from an understanding of the manor's layout. Now that the manor had been torn apart, the advantage had disappeared. Wei Chen abandoning this area wasn't too surprising. After Desert Dust went in from the back, he moved across the first floor to the entrance at the front and surveyed the surroundings calmly. But Tyranny's fans felt their hearts leap to their throats seeing his calmness. Windward formation didn't go elsewhere. He had come to the manor. It was just that he had circled around to the back and was standing beside a window like a withered-up plant. The view on the first floor had opened up considerably, but it wasn't as empty as a grass plains. The broken walls and collapsed ceilings were still significant obstructions. Windward formation couldn't see Desert Dust from his position. As a result, he switched positions and continued to peep like a pervert. Tyranny's fans wanted to rush onto the stage and tell Han Wenking that Wei Chen was sneaking around behind him. After moving to a different position, Wei Chen was finally able to see Han Wenking's Desert Dust, who was standing outside, checking his surroundings. Was he planning on leaving? Knock, knock, knock. Wei Chen had windward formation swing his staff, knocking on the window sill with all his might. Even if he was a warlock, he could still swing his staff like a melee weapon. No one knew what material Death's hand was made of, but whatever it was, it made an unpleasant sound when it hit against the stone window sill. Wei Chen thought Han Wenking wasn't able to hear him, so he swung his staff again. I'm here, he shouted in the chat. Desert Dust turned around and looked towards him. Wei Chen was very satisfied. You saw me, right? Han Wenking didn't reply. However, Desert Dust was marching over. Windward formation immediately shrunk back. Left, right. The audience would know, but Han Wenking wouldn't. Windward formation moved around and found another observation spot. He took a furtive glance into the manor. Han Wenking was moving fast. Desert Dust was almost about to reach that window. It looked like he was planning on breaking it apart to move past it. He's really got a gift for breaking things, Wei Chen mumbled. Windward formation raised his Death's hand. Dark energy began flickering. He had started casting a curse. He was planning on mounting a sneak attack, but anyone could predict that. How could an experienced player like Han Wenking not be able to? Bang! The window broke. Windward formation instinctively raised his Death's hand, but no one jumped through it. Desert Dust smashed the window to pieces and then moved a few steps over to another window. Bang, broken again, but still no one. Being so clever, how boring. I won't play with you, Wei Chen typed. Windward Formation turned around and left. Bang, bang, Han Wenking had become a dismantler today. Desert Dust smashed 2 more windows. On the 4th one, his character rushed out. Left, right, he turned to look at those ends. No one, after Wei Chen had said those words, his Windward Formation really did leave. He had made such a big commotion, and after saying he gave up, he really did give up. As a result, Desert Dust seemed to break those 2 windows for no reason before charging out ferociously. It all looked somewhat comical. To think the word comical would one day be used to describe Han Wenking. Are you tired of living? Tyranny's loyal fans roared. They were not happy with how Wei Chen had played with their captain. As for Wei Chen, his Windward Formation was puffing and wheezing as he climbed up the side of the manor. As he climbed, he would look downwards from time to time to see if Desert Dust had made his way over. It made him look quite flustered. Sure enough, Desert Dust quickly came. Not seeing anyone to the left or right, Han Wenking didn't hesitate. He chose a direction and started giving chase. Tyranny's fans had been worried that their captain would forget to look up. Reality proved that Han Wenking wasn't nearly as careless as they thought. The moment he turned around, he looked up and down. The flustered Windward Formation was immediately caught by him. Wei Chen, who was constantly looking downwards, noticed Desert Dust too. Windward Formation hastened his movements, making him appear even more flustered. Han Wenking saw that his opponent was in front of him, but he had no way of attacking him. No one had a shorter attack range than strikers. Blade Masters, Berserkers, the other melee classes could use the reach of their sword to extend their range, but strikers only had their arms and legs. Chase. Han Wenking was decisive. He looked at the side of the manor and quickly found a foothold. Desert Dust jumped, stepped, jumped, stepped, jumped. Han Wenking hadn't deliberately practiced climbing on this sort of terrain before, but with 10 years of glory experience, how could his ability to adapt be normal? The speed at which he climbed seemed quite a bit faster than the flustered Windward Formation. Hee, Wei Chen suddenly laughed. Windward Formation didn't keep jumping. He pointed his death's hand down and started casting. Although Desert Dust was fast, there was still some distance between them. It wouldn't be possible for him to rush over in time to interrupt the cast. But seeing Windward Formation casting a curse, the instant Desert Dust paused to jump off a foothold, he waved his hands. Chi Bullet, a low-level Chi Master skill, flew out. Strikers didn't have any long-ranged attacks. It was certainly a huge weak spot, so almost all strikers would learn mid-ranged skills like Chi Bullet. Even though it wouldn't deal much damage, the purpose was to interrupt casts. For example, if Windward Formation dodged the Chi Bullet, he would have to cancel his cast. But Windward Formation didn't move. Hee. Wei Chen laughed again. Pa Chi bloomed around his body, but the curse from Death's hand was released simultaneously. Was it really simultaneous? Of course not. Since he could cast the skill, it meant that the Chi Bullet had been a bit too late. It was a small detail that was hard to notice, but the system had no trouble making this decision. The curse had been cast. Wei Chen didn't have time to dodge the attack though. Fortunately, it was just a Chi Bullet, so the damage wasn't high. The knockback wasn't anything noteworthy either. Windward Formation seemed to be unfazed. His skill was able to come out in the end. Chaotic Rain. Using this skill in this situation was truly too disgusting. Desert Dust, who was climbing up the manor, had no place to maneuver around. He couldn't escape, but he could still dodge it. Han Wenking saw a place with cover. He temporarily gave up on chasing and had Desert Dust jump towards there. Chaotic Rain fell, but Desert Dust was able to find cover in time and avoid the attack. Beautiful, Wei Chen praised his opponent. Windward Formation didn't keep jumping up, instead dropping down. After dropping down, Desert Dust was now in his line of sight. A dark energy began swirling around his death's hand again. Grasping ghosts, Desert Dust had nowhere to run. If he jumped out, he would be caught in chaotic rain, which would probably be even more disastrous for him. The fierce tiger was trapped. Caught between a rock and a hard place, the curse flew out and struck. Chapter 1500. I need to complete it. Chapter 1500. I need to complete it. Translator. Namyami editor. Namyami. Several shadow specters coiled around Desert Dust, grasping ghosts. It dealt damage over time and amplified the damage dealt by the warlock. When the skill ended, the warlock would be healed 33% of the total damage dealt to the target during the duration of the skill. It was a skill that dealt damage, debuffed the target, and healed the user. When it first came out, everyone thought it was a completely broken skill. However, after some time, people figured out that while the skill wasn't bad, it wasn't broken because the effects of the skill were rather weak. Even so, it was a must-have skill for warlocks. Wei Chen knew that he was guaranteed to land a hit, so he started with this skill before continuing his assault. Chaotic rain continued. Han Wenqing looked completely helpless. Was he going to keep getting played like a trapped animal? Tyranny's fans burst out in fury. When had their captain ever suffered such humiliation? Jump. Everyone thought to themselves, so what if you became confused? The outcome is going to be bad anyways, but being trapped like this and getting trampled on was too stifling. From their understanding of Han Wenqing, they didn't think Han Wenqing would be willing to resign himself to this kind of fate. However, Desert Dust didn't move with shadow flames. Windward Formation cast another spell. Dark purple flames began to whirl around Desert Dust. These 6 seconds of flames didn't only burn down Desert Dust's health, but the hearts of every Tyranny fan as well. Why isn't he jumping? They couldn't understand. The Desert Dust in front of them was slowly drifting away from the Desert Dust in their hearts. What self-control? Fang Rui sighed. Yeah, Ye Xiu nodded his head. Not only had Han Wenqing learned the word retreat, he became even more unyielding. His style had changed to the extent that those familiar with him couldn't recognize it anymore. On the playoff stage, these changes only became more apparent. How surprising! I thought you'd jump. Wei Chen poked at his weak spot. Han Wenqing didn't reply. In the meantime, Windward Formation started casting his third spell. With the duration of chaotic rain, he knew that his third skill would land. Darkness ripped apart the air. Windward Formation had summoned Death's Door. How shameless. Countless people cursed it in their hearts. In terms of ruthlessness, there was nothing to pick at. Wei Chen's methods didn't carry a shred of restraint. He wanted to annihilate his opponent. The tear appeared in the sky, revealing an imposing Death's Door. The chaotic rain stopped. Whoosh! A figure jumped from a window sill. Who else could it be but Desert Dust? He had been forced into a location that would provide cover from chaotic rain and then forcefully tanked 2 skills. He had looked completely helpless at the time. But when the last drop of rain fell, he immediately jumped. The Death's Door next to him. It was as if Han Wenqing couldn't see it. Desert Dust went straight for Windward Formation, determined and decisive without any hesitation. In this instant, the Han Wenqing that everyone was familiar with had returned. Tyranny's fans didn't have time to adjust their emotions, involuntarily letting out a cheer. Tendrils of darkness extended out from Death's Door, its target even bumping into it as it scurried away. The darkness immediately gave chase. Han Wenqing ignored it. Desert Dust used the wall as a foothold and continued jumping. Keep charging forward even if the darkness behind him was in pursuit. The fans of Tyranny stood up from their seats. They had completely forgotten about their indignation a few seconds ago from seeing Desert Dust cowering under that window. Punch! Desert Dust had swung his fist. And Windward Formation. Windward Formation wasn't able to escape in time. To attack Desert Dust, he had dropped down from his original position, moving closer to where his target was. This change in position became Han Wenqing's opportunity to attack. This decisiveness and ferocity had been outside of Wei Chen's expectations. He had calculated that death's door would be cast the moment chaotic rain ended. He had thought that there was enough time, but now he discovered that what he thought was enough was far from it in front of Han Wenking's valor. Just a bit more, and the tendrils of darkness would catch Desert Dust, but it was too late. Desert Dust's fist had already reached windward formation. Bang! Hit. A solid punch had landed. However, the slight pause from the punch was enough for the darkness to catch Desert Dust. The tendrils quickly coiled around him. Was this punch just to vent his anger? Everyone thought to themselves. But for Tyranny's fans, even if it was just that, it felt incredibly satisfying. To them, the journey was more important than the destination. But Han Wenking's thoughts weren't so simple. After the punch landed, Desert Dust grabbed with his two hands. Back throw. Windward formation had been grabbed by him, and Desert Dust had been grabbed by Death's door. Both of them were dragged away. The two were dragged together towards the Death's door, which then burst into a cloud of darkness. Death's door had accomplished its mission and disappeared. The two dropped from the sky. One on top, one below, one slow, one fast. The faster one was windward formation. Although he wasn't affected by Death's door, the back throw wasn't something the Death's door could interrupt. Desert Dust was able to complete the back throw, flinging windward formation crashing down. As a result, windward formation fell faster. On the other hand, Desert Dust took the damage from Death's door before free-falling down. While in the air, Desert Dust assumed an offensive posture. Wei Chen was helpless, though. Windward formation wasn't free-falling. He had been tossed by back throw. Before he hit the ground, he would be in a stunned state. He could only watch as Desert Dust raise his foot, eagle stamp. Desert Dust dove down as if he were an eagle catching its prey. However, windward formation could do nothing. Sigh. Wei Chen let out a gentle sigh. I was too slow. If he had reacted faster or put in the inputs faster, perhaps that punch wouldn't have landed, or he might have been able to dodge the back throw. In either case, he wouldn't be in his current predicament. While stunned, he could only watch as the eagle stamp came towards him. The instant the skill effect ended, would he be able to dodge in time? Wei Chen felt a tremble in his heart. His fingers were starting to go stiff. It was another contest of reaction speed and hand speed. That was what he was most afraid of and what he was weakest at. But that's the only way to get out of this predicament. If he was hit by the eagle stamp and let Han Wenking close in onto him, his fate would be sealed. Focus. Wei Chen grit his teeth. He was no longer looking at Desert Dust, but carefully feeling windward formation's condition. The instant the stun ended, he would immediately act. I can move. All of these thoughts happened in an instant. Wei Chen felt that the stun had worn off. In that instant, his mind was blank. He had forgotten about the match. He had forgotten what he was doing. He only had one thought: complete this input. Windward formation raised his two hands in front of him. Bang! Desert Dust's eagle stamp was kicked windward formation's chest. Oh! Tyranny's fans cheered for a moment before abruptly stopping. Windward formation poofed into smoke and dispersed into the air as Desert Dust continued to fall. Han Wenking turned around. Windward formation was back on the wall on the side of the manor. Shadow clone technique. I did it. Wei Chen's heart was beating intensely. The lingering fear from the narrow escape from death made his whole body turn soft. It was just a low-level skill, but because of the focus he had put in, he felt like collapsing from exhaustion. But it's not over yet. The battle had only just begun. Wei Chen immediately continued. Windward formation started casting another spell from the wall. Soul Slice. A blade of darkness cut through the air. In this situation, at this distance, Wei Chen didn't think of using a high-level skill for a setup. He simply wanted to take advantage of the fact that Desert Dust was in the air and could not dodge, so he could deal some damage. He predicted where Desert Dust would land and aimed his Soul Slice. However, Eagle Stamp wasn't as simple as just a stomp. Han Wenking saw windward formation casting a spell and immediately finched his eagle stamp. Pa pa pa, desert dust stepped in the air 3 times. He didn't hit his target, but he used these steps to slow his speed down a little bit. But it still hit in the end. Wei Chen was a crafty old fox. This little trick wasn't going to mess him up. But apart from damage, the soul slice didn't do anything else. Desert dust landed on the ground and darted towards the manor in pursuit. As for windward formation, he was once again climbing towards the roof in a fluster. We're not going to see a repeat of what we just saw, right? Many of the viewers started to worry. No, Li Yibo dispelled these doubts from the audience. His skills aren't off cooldown yet. How could we get a repeat so soon? Li Yibo said. Of course, he can't use the same skills, but does he have the tools to do something similar as before? Pan Lin said. Li Yibo thought carefully about the warlock's kit. It shouldn't be possible, right? He wasn't certain though, so he didn't say it.